It's 3 p.m, it's Patrick Christys, it's GBNews. Absolutely massive pressure on the BBC now to name this star embroiled in the teen sex pics scandal. Will the BBC name them? Will an MP name them using parliamentary privilege? Or will they name themselves? We'll be talking about all of that. In other news, a big story today. A teenager has stabbed a teacher at a school in Gloucestershire. We are expecting a police statement on this in the next half hour, which we will bring to you live on this show. In other news, I'm also going to be talking as well about yet more Channel migrant madness. 1,500 arrivals in the space of the last 4 days, and it comes as a community in Wales is now rising up against an asylum seeker hotel in their area. I suspect that won't be the last we hear of that. And as well, yes, this big one as well. Is time up now for Jeremy Hunt? Was Liz Truss right? Has Hunt actually ruined our economy? Patrick Christys on GB News. GB Views at gbnews.com. A lot to go at there. We will, of course, be going in on whether or not the BBC should now be naming that star presenter embroiled in this scandal. But it's your headlines now.
Good afternoon to you. It's 3:03. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB newsroom. Joe Biden has now left Windsor Castle, bringing to an end his meeting with King Charles. Although it wasn't a state visit earlier, the US president was given a ceremonial welcome from the Welsh Guards and a warm greeting from His Majesty. It's understood they discussed climate issues. It follows a meeting with Rishi Sunak in Downing Street earlier, where, despite recent tension over Ukraine, both leaders paid tribute to the special relationship.
It's great to have you here. Back in Downing Street. I think you've been here a few times before, I know, but your first time as president, so we're very privileged and fortunate to have you here. Thanks for coming.
Couldn't be meeting with a closer friend and a greater ally, and our relationship is rock solid.
Pressure's growing on the BBC over how it's dealt with allegations a prominent male presenter paid £35,000 to a teenager for explicit photos. The corporation announced yesterday it had suspended the unnamed star and says it's working as quickly as possible to establish the facts. The BBC is due to discuss the matter with the police today. However, The Sun has reported the alleged victim's family are unhappy with the BBC's response, claiming no one from the corporation rang them for a proper interview after the initial complaint in May. The Justice Secretary has indicated there may need to be an investigation into how the allegations were handled.
These are really serious and really concerning allegations, and they need to be investigated quickly. Now, in the fullness of time, maybe there will be a consideration as to how this was dealt with. I think the important thing now, however, is that these matters are investigated, whether that's within the BBC, but also potentially by the police, if indeed that's what the police decide to do.
More tube strikes are on the way, with ASLEF members set to walk out on the 26th and the 28th of July in a long-running dispute over pay and conditions. That is a Tuesday and a Thursday. ASLEF says the action comes as management isn't meeting the tube drivers' demands for change. It follows RMT members' announcement that they will take action starting from the 23rd of July. A teenage boy has been arrested after a teacher was stabbed at Tewkesbury Academy in Gloucestershire earlier. Reports suggest a male teacher who's been rushed to hospital may have been injured after intervening in a fight between students. Pupils are now able to leave the secondary school, which was put into lockdown while police responded to the incident. The head teacher says all pupils remain safe and well. The Home Secretary has reiterated the government's commitment to detaining illegal migrants who arrive in the UK on small boats. Suella Braverman was speaking following the arrival of almost 1,300 people since Friday. Now, the provisional total for 2023 so far is around 4% lower than this time last year, when around 13,200 crossings had been recorded. But Suella Braverman says it has to stop.
Prime Minister and I are absolutely clear. We've got to stop the boats. That's why we're working very hard to introduce new legislation. It's going through Parliament right now in terms of instilling a new system whereby if you arrive in the UK illegally, you'll be detained and thereafter swiftly removed. Last year, there were 45,000 people who arrived illegally. It's costing us £6 million a day in hotel accommodation. This has to stop.
The Russian president met the head of the Wagner mercenary group shortly after last month's failed mutiny. That's according to the Kremlin. Evgeny Prigozhin, who led what's been described as the biggest challenge to Vladimir Putin's authority in more than 2 decades, was among 35 people invited to a meeting in Moscow to assess the war in Ukraine. Prigozhin was thought to have been exiled in Belarus following the attempted coup, which lasted just 24 hours. Shareholders in Thames Water have agreed to provide a further £750 million in funding in an attempt to stave off nationalisation. The utility giants warned, though, £2.5 billion more will be needed by 2030 as it struggles under a mountain of debt. The latest funding deal comes amid government contingency plans to take control if the firm collapses. Thames Water is the UK's biggest supplier. It serves 15 million households across the southeast. And more than 100,000 holidaymakers have been affected by EasyJet summer flight cancellations. The airlines axed around 1,700 flights between July and September, most of them from Gatwick Airport. Fridays and weekends are expected to be most at risk from disruption. EasyJet says it's because of air traffic control restrictions rather than staff shortages, and says 95% of passengers have been booked onto alternative flights. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. But now it's over to Patrick.
This BBC star needs to be named. The BBC need to name him. An MP using parliamentary privilege needs to name him, or he needs to name himself. There is a stark contrast between the BBC's desire to protect the privacy of one of its own stars and the way in which they treated Cliff Richard. They used helicopter shots of his home being raided. His name was dragged through the mud, his reputation completely tarnished. The BBC tried to claim all of that was in the public interest, but of course the reported £2 million they paid Cliff would indicate that maybe it wasn't. We now have this farcical situation where everybody seems to know who this BBC presenter is and what he's been accused of. But also, crucially, other stars, and this is, I think, the important point, really, are being needlessly dragged into this. And I'm not normally Jeremy Vine's biggest fan, but nobody deserves to have allegations of this nature falsely levelled against them. Rylan Clark, bless him, Nicky Campbell. I've even found it within myself to have some sympathy for Gary Lineker. Brian Moore, for goodness sake. I think that was probably the weirdest one for me. All of these people are completely innocent, and they have had their names, to an extent, dragged through the mud online. Twitter is now a cesspit of defamation. Everybody's talking about this. Every pub is humming with rumour and speculation. Every workplace, every family home. It is, frankly, not fair on everybody else that this individual is not identified. It has got too big. The allegations are too serious. And it is, in my view, unquestionably in the public interest. If this BBC star is paid with public money to provide a public service broadcast, then surely the public has a right to know who he is. But the public also has a right to know whether the BBC knew about these allegations, what they knew, when they knew it, and why they let this person continue in their job for so long. The BBC has just launched BBC Verify and Verified Live, I believe, and in fact, I think one of those shows is on air at the same time as mine. It has positioned itself as moral, factual, objective and a truth giver. And yet currently and arguably for decades, given previous scandals involving the likes of Jimmy Savile, Rolf Harris and others, behind the scenes, they don't feel very happy to let their own truth come out. Yes, of course, it is important, very important, actually, to draw a clear distinction between any previous scandals and, indeed, the allegations involved in this one. And we wait for things to emerge in the fullness of time. GBviews at gbnews.com. Let's have a look now how this current scandal has unfolded. The family first made a complaint back in May. Last Thursday, the BBC received new allegations of a, quote, different nature. On Friday, The Sun alleged the presenter paid the teenager £35,000 for sexually explicit photos. On Saturday, various BBC presenters, frankly, were forced to deny being the accused. And yesterday, the male presenter was suspended and the BBC contacted the police. I am joined now by GB News' national reporter Paul Hawkins, who is outside New Broadcasting House. And Paul, from what we can gather anyway, a lot of pressure mounting on the BBC to for the sake, really, of A, maybe public interest, but also B, their own stars, to name the individual in question. What's the latest?
Yeah, well, the BBC can't name the individual. There was a Supreme Court ruling in 2022 precisely because of the Sir Cliff Richard scandal, which said that anyone who is under investigation by law enforcement agencies must have their right to privacy respected. So the BBC cannot name that person unless there are charges or an arrest is made concerning the individual. And indeed, that may be why the BBC has brought in the police, why they contacted them at the end of last week, and why they're meeting with them today, we believe, this afternoon. So we're awaiting the outcome of that meeting with the police, who themselves have said they have been notified by the BBC, but they are waiting for more information before they act further. At the moment, we're in the realms of lots of speculation, lots of questions, very few answers. We have these very serious allegations that have been made in the Sun newspaper, which so far hasn't published any evidence. They have the family's word for these allegations, but they haven't published any evidence so far. For example, screenshots of bank statements or payments or pictures that have been made. So that needs to be verified, the story itself, and then we need to hear from the BBC about its investigation. Quite rightly, questions that need to be asked, such as why has it taken so long? May the 19th, we know they were first contacted, then they were made aware of further allegations last week. What questions were asked of this presenter? Why wasn't the presenter suspended? And where are we now with the ongoing investigation? As you say, some presenters have already been have had their pretty traumatic weekend, frankly, being named on social media as the unnamed presenter. And of course, they are now open to lawsuits from lawyers, also from the police, who potentially could bring about charges of malicious communication. But for reasons of privacy that I've already outlined and defamation, the presenter so far cannot be named, and at the moment we're waiting for more information from both the police and the BBC.
Yeah, look, Paul, thank you very, very much. It's Paul Hawkins there, who is GBNews' national reporter, who's outside New Broadcasting House, and we will be going back and forth to Paul over the course of this show for any updates. Thank you very, very much. Well, I'm joined now by former BBC executive and presenter Roger Bolton. Roger, thank you very much. What's your take on whether or not this individual in question should be named, primarily in the sake of public interest, firstly, you could argue, but then also, secondly, to protect other stars? What do you think?
Well, your reporter has just explained very carefully why it can't be done, despite your introduction. And the question you haven't also asked is, why is the Sun newspaper, which broke this story and runs with it, itself has not named the individual in Poland? And there are good reasons for this. I mean, in the past, I think the BBC has been guilty, together with, say, the Roman Catholic Church or the Anglican Church, of putting the institution and the organisation first. In other words, more concerned with protecting itself than the individual concerned. I don't think this is the case here. There are genuine difficulties. Now, what the BBC will have to do in the end, it will have to lay out, and should lay out, the timetable of what it was told when it was told. But we shouldn't rush to judgment. We're dealing now with a situation essentially which is bad on social media and may get worse when we're dealing with deep fake videos and we're dealing with artificial intelligence and so on, which is that there's a raft of allegations on the internet, probably most of them untrue. And if you act on all of them, you'd be taking every presenter off the screen. It might be good for young people who want to come through and get experience, but you can't just go and say, because the social media are full of all this stuff, you should publish the name. You've got two responsibilities, haven't you? You've got, first of all, you've got the responsibility to the individual concerned, the boy or young man who seems to be affected. You've got to protect him. Then you've got the presenter. There will be, I'm not saying it happens in this case, there will be malicious allegations. You have to check them out. You can't just throw people to the wolves. And the other thing here is it's not clear, to me anyway, a criminal offence has been committed. If the boy was 18 at the moment at which money and photographs exchanged hands, that will not, as I understand it, be a criminal offence. It would be if it was done when he was 17. It should be enough to get the guy fired from the BBC as a presenter if that happened, but it wouldn't be a legal offence. And the other thing you've got to remember is that in the past, the BBC have played it wrongly in two ways. One, with a guy called Lord McAlpine, Newsnight alleged he was being involved with abuse. He was entirely innocent. Newsnight got the wrong person and showed his face. So that was a catastrophe. On the other hand, in other instances, you might say about Jimmy Savile, the BBC didn't act quickly enough. When it came to Cliff Richard, whose house was, in the end, searched by the police, which was a news event, the allegation was, and I agree with it actually, that BBC went over the top, literally with helicopters, to cover it. So you're dealing here with, a real problem about defamation, a real problem about finding out what the facts are, and so on. And there are a lot of people, and I have to say in your introduction the same, really enjoy kicking the BBC. Well, I've kicked them sometimes, but I don't think they need to be kicked this time. But they, or not yet anyway. You've had Priti Patel, you have all those sorts of people immediately saying, kick the BBC. You even have the Labour shadow minister saying BBC must put its house in order, and nobody knows the facts. We don't know exactly. We know 7 weeks ago, I think we're sure, that there was a complaint to the BBC. We don't know what the complaint was. We don't know who it was made to. We don't know allegations. We need to know all of this.
We do. You raise a series of very, very good points, okay? And it is absolutely vital as well. People like you and I, quite possibly for the foreseeable future, are treading an absolute minefield here with this. It is, I would argue, unquestionably, massively in the public interest. And I just wonder where the BBC goes.
No, it's not massively in the public interest. There's a difference
is it not?
Between...
You see, if somebody, well, no, I'm going to say, wait a second now, Roger. With respect, I let you talk for a very long time there. I would argue that it is. If somebody is paid essentially by the taxpayer and is doing some kind of public service broadcast on our television screens, then I would argue that it is probably in the public interest to have some idea who this individual is. You obviously disagree. Why?
No, there's a difference between the public being interested. Look, I'm interested in lots of salacious gossip, right? We're all like that in private. But, that's not the same as the public interest. There's a public interest in seeing that people aren't condemned with assuming that people are innocent to the point until they prove guilty. And to out somebody in this way without any evidence, to feed them to the wolves, effectively, would be wrong. You've got to have substantial evidence. And the other thing, let me tell you a story back a bit. About 30 or 35 years ago, one of the most famous faces on the BBC was a guy called Frank Boff. And he presented sports programs nationwide, of which I was editor and so on. Uncle Frank, he was called. About 5 years after I'd worked with him, whatever, he went into a brothel, dressed as a woman, and took drugs. Heaven only knows what was going on. It is impossible often to guess or to know what people are like inside and what mad things they will do. We're all a bit strange. You can't rush to judgment. You've got to have evidence, because if you do that, it means that anybody can put a rumour up on the internet and destroy somebody's career. You've got to have an evidential base. But once you've got it, you've got to show the public, if you're the BBC in particular, what the evidence is and why you acted the way you did.
Can I ask, from your personal insight, former BBC executive, what do you think is happening behind the scenes at the moment? Because there will be a huge, I would imagine, amount of panic about, did we react to this correctly? You've identified there as well. One of the issues that will be lobbed at the BBC now is there was something brought to you around 50 days ago, and then it was a period of time after that you've had a suspension, etc. They will now be, I would imagine, quite scared of the incoming inquest, will they? What kind of discussions will be going on, do you think?
Well, they might be scared, they might not. I mean, I think it's pretty clear that the Director General, who's a very, by the way, activist Director General, I mean, he really is, didn't know anything till Thursday. And I think if you say, you gave him Thursday to Sunday to act, as he essentially did, that's not bad. So the question is, what happened in those previous weeks until he got involved? And then the question is, what was the evidence put forward? To whom did it go? Was it the investigator? When was it pushed forward? I agree with you. We need to know all of that. But also, what was that initial information? And why does the BBC say that on Thursday, the nature of the information changed and became much more serious? We can only speculate about that. But, there are lots of complaints, malicious complaints, made all over the country about BBC presenters, staff, whatever. You can't just accept them all as being the truth. You've got to check them. But the thing about the BBC is, at the end of all of this, lay it all out in public, the timeline, so we can see what exactly happened. Who knew what, when, and what did they do?
Look, Roger, thank you very much. I must say, it's been really insightful stuff, and I've thoroughly enjoyed having this right at the top of the show. It's Roger Bolton there, who's a former BBC executive and presenter. Take care. OK, right. In the next few minutes, I will have the latest on the Channel migrant crisis, as 1,500 people cross on small boats in just 4 days. I believe I might be going to our reporter, Jack Carlson, who is in Gloucestershire for us, in the latest of the situation involving a teenager who has reportedly stabbed a teacher at a school there. I think we are going to Jack Carlson now, are we? Or we might go to him very, very shortly.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GBNews.
Afternoon, I'm Alex Deakin and this is your latest weather update for GB News from the Met Office. Some wet weather around for many places tonight, and we do have warnings across Northern Ireland and Scotland. This area of low pressure is responsible, but actually it's the weather fronts moving ahead of it that have been bringing soggy conditions for quite a few through the day so far. That rain's getting heavier now across much of Scotland. Some thunderstorms across parts of Northern Ireland, and both could see some disruption from the heavy rain. And further south there's likely to be some wet weather too, brushing South Wales for a time this evening, then into the Midlands, East Anglia and southern counties of England. So, as I say, for many, a wet night, pretty mild one as well, temperatures staying in the teens, the high teens across the southeast, where it'll still be quite damp and humid on Tuesday morning. The outbreaks of rain here should peter out through the morning. And then it's basically sunshine and showers tomorrow, but again, we are likely to see some pretty heavy downpours developing, particularly across parts of Scotland, especially in the northeast, where the winds are light, which means the downpours could be very slow moving. Elsewhere, there should be some glimmers of sunshine between the showers, but still on the cool side, with temperatures mostly struggling to get into the low 20s at best. Wednesday's a similar story, though perhaps not quite as intense with the downpours. Many eastern areas should start dry with some sunshine, but then the showers get going again through the course of the afternoon. Quite breezy and again feeling on the cool side with temperatures high teens, low 20s at best. Goodbye.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GBNews.
Well, last month, Rishi Sunak claimed that his plan to stop the boats was working, but in the last 4 days, 1,500 migrants have crossed the Channel, and a community in Wales has risen up about the imposition of an asylum seeker hotel in their town. We will have footage from that incident and also, of course, be discussing the latest Channel migrant numbers, and we will have the latest from that school stabbing. Patrick Christys on GB News, Britain's news channel. Welcome back. Well, a little bit later on, I will be discussing the idea that maybe Jeremy Hunt is an absolute dud and we are heading for economic ruin. And as Joe Biden makes a very brief visit to the UK, I will ask, does the US president really hate Britain? But a teenage boy has been arrested after a teacher was stabbed at a secondary school. Gloucestershire police said an adult has been taken to hospital with a suspected stab wound after Tewkesbury Academy was placed on lockdown. We're going live now to our reporter, Jack Carson, who is outside the school. Jack, thank you very much. What's the latest?
Well, Patrick, we're about 5-10 minutes away from a police press conference, or a police statement here, rather, to, of course, find out a little bit more information about what exactly happened here at this school this morning. We have reports that police were called here to the Tewkesbury Academy around 9:10 to reports of a student stabbing a teacher. There were multiple ambulances on scene, as well as, at times, armed police. Now, all of those police have now gone, and it seems like much of the investigation here has now concluded. We know that a male teacher was taken to a nearby hospital suffering from stab wounds. We have no update as to the condition of that teacher, but of course we may well find out some more information in this statement very, very shortly. Now, the head teacher of the school, Kathleen McGillicuddy, said that of course they appreciate how, of course, concerning this was for a lot of parents. There were hundreds of parents that gathered outside here, the school, earlier because the school went into complete lockdown. No pupils for many years weren't allowed to leave until it got to around 2 o'clock this afternoon, when the first students started to leave the school gates. Lots of students quite literally running into their arms of their very worried parents. Of course, the school did reassure them that their kids were safe throughout the day, and the police believe that this was a isolated incident, but they did lock down nearby schools where the playing fields run, but onto the back of this academy behind me, of course, just to make sure that everyone was safe. It appears that children were sent and gathered into the school hall inside the school, where they were told what had happened. And the Prime Minister has said that his thoughts are with that member of staff in hospital.
Jack, thank you very, very much. Jack Carson there. We will be having that police statement, in about 5 or 10 minutes' time, I believe. Jack Carson there. Now, the Prime Minister's recent boast that his Stop the Boats policies are working appears to be in absolute tatters today. Last month, Rishi Sunak claimed those policies were behind a 20% fall in the number of Channel migrants arriving in the UK. But, shock horror, there's been a huge surge in recent weeks, and 13,000 people have now crossed the same time that it was at this point last year. Our Home and Security editor, Mark White, has this exclusive report for us.
Things are now down 20% compared to last year. This is proof that our deterrent strategy can work.
It was a bold claim. Just a month ago, the Prime Minister down in Dover insisting his Stop the Boats plan was working. But since then, a surge in small boat arrivals has exposed that claim to be at best premature. The latest arrivals at Dover Harbour come amid an improvement in weather conditions, which has seen more than 1,500 people brought here in just 4 days. In fact, the number of arrivals for the year so far has reached the 13,000 mark. That figure is the same as the 13,000 who crossed at this point last year. Maritime experts who know these waters well say the initial 20% reduction in crossings was purely down to bad weather and not government policy. Despite the clearly increasing numbers of Channel migrants, the Home Secretary has reiterated her determination to stop the boats.
Well, Prime Minister and I are absolutely clear. We've got to stop the boats. That's why we're working very hard to introduce new legislation. Last year, there were 45,000 people who arrived illegally. It's costing us £6 million a day in hotel accommodation. This has to stop.
The surge in small boat arrivals is just the latest setback to the government's plans to tackle the Channel migrant crisis. The Court of Appeal ruled the deal to send some of those arriving to Rwanda is unlawful. And in Parliament, the Lords are continuing to block the progress of the government's illegal migration bill. Weather conditions in the Channel are set to get choppy in the days ahead. But we're heading for the peak months, where flat camp conditions will pave the way for thousands more to cross. And if those figures continue to increase beyond last year's totals, Rishi Sunak will face the prospect of failing to meet one of his government's key priorities. Mark White, GB News.
OK, now a little bit later on in the show, we're going to be discussing about that uprising, I suppose you could say, in Wales over the asylum seeker hotel there. But Mark White joins me in the studio now, and as you can tell, we have a couple of breaking news lines about the BBC.
Yes, with regard to the allegations surrounding a prominent BBC presenter, Scotland Yard now confirming that they are assessing information with a view to launching perhaps an investigation. They've just put out a statement. It says that detectives from the Met Specialist Crime Command met with representatives from the BBC today, this morning in fact. The meeting, they say, took place virtually. They say that they're assessing the information discussed at the meeting, and further inquiries are taking place to establish whether there is evidence of a criminal offence having been committed here. They stress that at the moment there is no formal investigation that has been launched.
OK. And there's something else as well.
And there's another related breaking news line which relates to the presenter Nicky Campbell. One of a number of prominent BBC faces who've come under the spotlight from social media, posting, suggesting that they might be involved in this particular episode. They have come out, of course, vehemently and denied that, not just Nicky Campbell, but Ryland Clark and, of course, Jeremy Vine and others. So Nicky Campbell has contacted the Metropolitan Police to issue a formal complaint. Scotland Yard has now confirmed that it has launched a specific investigation into a malicious communication. So that is ongoing in tandem, perhaps, with an investigation into the presenter at the centre of these allegations. Still in the early scoping out stages of whether to launch that formal investigation, but they have had that meeting with the BBC.
Look, Mark, thank you very, very much. Mark White there, our Home and Security Editor. Well, look, loads more still to come, of course, between now and 4 p.m. Joe Biden claims the relationship between the UK and the US is rock solid, but is it? And frankly, is he? And does Biden really hate Britain? But right now, it is your headlines with Aaron Armstrong.
Hi there, it is 3:33. Aaron Armstrong here in the GB newsroom. Joe Biden's completed his brief tour of the UK after meetings with the Prime Minister and the King. The US President is now on his way to Lithuania for a two-day NATO summit, which will start tomorrow. Now, earlier, Mr Biden was given a warm welcome at Windsor Castle, where he discussed climate issues with the King. And that followed a meeting with Rishi Sunak in Downing Street, where, despite recent tensions over Ukraine, both leaders paid tribute to the special relationship. The Met Police say they are assessing information provided during a meeting with BBC representatives following allegations a prominent male presenter paid £35,000 to a teenager for explicit photos. The force says further inquiries are taking place to establish whether there's the evidence of a criminal offence having been committed. The corporation announced yesterday it suspended the unnamed star almost 2 months after a complaint was first made. And Gloucestershire Police will shortly make a statement following the arrest of a teenage boy at a secondary school over the stabbing of a teacher. Reports suggest a male teacher may have been injured after intervening in a fight between students at Tewkesbury Academy. The teacher was rushed to hospital. Pupils have now been allowed to leave the school. It was put into lockdown while police responded to the incident. And more than 100,000 holidaymakers have been affected by EasyJet flight cancellations this summer. The airlines axed around 1,700 flights scheduled to take place between July and September. Most of them were from Gatwick Airport over the weekends. EasyJet says it's due to air traffic control restrictions rather than staff shortages, and 95% of passengers have been booked onto alternative flights. And more on all of our stories on our website, gbnews.com.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
And a quick look at the markets today. The pound will buy you $1.2760 and 1.1651 euros. The price of gold, £1,500 and 89 pence per ounce. And the FTSE 100 is at 7,291 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the finance report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Yes, hello. Now, look, in a few moments' time, we are expecting to be going to Gloucestershire for a police statement in the wake of that teacher reportedly being stabbed by a teenager there. But before that, Joe Biden has arrived in the UK yesterday and he's already left. Biden held talks with Rishi Sunak, or Rashid Sunak, as he introduced him as the first time, this morning before meeting with King Charles at Windsor Castle. He stopped over on his way to a NATO meeting in Lithuania. But I want to know whether the US president actually likes our country. If you remember, he visited both Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland in April, spending much more time in the latter. And it is reported that Biden allegedly said, "I hate the English," in a behind-closed-doors meeting in the mid to late 2000s. It is fair to say Biden has made more than his fair share of mistakes. In April, he talked about the Irish rugby union team's famous win a few years ago over New Zealand, who are quite famously known as the All Blacks. However, he managed to call them the Black and Tans, which was, of course, the nickname of British soldiers who fought Irish rebels just over 100 years ago. Let's remind ourselves.
See this tie I have with the shamrock on it? This was given to me by one of these guys right here. Was a hell of a rugby player, and they beat the hell out of the Black and Tans. Oh, God.
He sure did. Here he is in April 2022, following a speech in North Carolina. He leaves the podium and goes to shake hands with nobody. Yes, there we are. Someone go and just get one of those shepherd sticks and just steer him back. Yep, there we go, Joe. OK. And as many people will remember, Joe Biden sadly fell up the stairs when attempting to board Air Force One on his way to Atlanta. He tried to recover. I was giving a little salute at the top. There we go. On his way up. There we go. Go on, Joe. Nearly there. Nearly there. Just watch it. There's only a couple more to go. Yep. OK. Oh, yep. God bless America. There we are. Yeah, well done, our troops. OK, now, if you aren't satisfied with seeing Joe fall over once, well, let's just watch him again. Here we go. US Air Force Academy. Oh, Joe. Oh, grievous. That was the ceremony in Colorado in early June. Oh, well. Now, I can now cross live to New York and get the view of geopolitical analyst Marco Vincenzino. Marco, thank you very much. Great to have you on the show. Does Joe Biden hate Britain?
No, I think it's important to go beyond the personal relationship and focus more on the overall broad relationship, the U.S.-UK relationship, looking at Ukraine. The UK and the US are the two big the operation in Ukraine, extremely important. This is the fifth meeting in 5 months between the American president and the British prime minister. So, although maybe the personal relationship may not be as pleasant as one may would like, at least they have a basic working relationship. And the UK has been a steadfast friend for the US. It's extremely important to emphasize. Now, on other issues such as there's been differences definitely on the issue of Northern Ireland, Brexit, a lot of being ideological differences between the two. But I think in terms of the overall broad transatlantic relationship, it does continue. If you were to remove Rishi Sunak or to remove Joe Biden, the relationship will continue. It's an historic relationship. It's an important one. And it's an important one for the broader Western democratic world.
Do you think this is really coming from Joe Biden, or do you think this is coming from advisors behind the scenes? A flying visit with Rishi Sunak, a coffee with him in Northern Ireland. We've seen the idea that he might want to ban Ben Wallace from becoming head of NATO and actually remarkably have the EU bigwig Ursula von der Leyen in there. Is this really Joe Biden's view, do you think? Or do you think he's getting advice from some kind of ultra-woke progressives behind the scenes who see Britain as some kind of colonialist terror?
I mean, I wouldn't go that far.
I think we're just struggling a bit with your connection there, Marco. I'm really sorry. Look, Marco, we're going to pause it there, mate. I'm afraid there's a bit of a problem with your connection. We're going to try and get that fixed, unfortunately. It's Marco Vincenzino there, who is live in New York for us. Yes, just to recap, of course, King Charles met Joe Biden, I should say, a little bit earlier on, as did indeed Rishi Sunak. Joe Biden, as I understand it, was talking with King Charles about the environment, and with Rishi Sunak about Ukraine. Very controversial what's been going on with America and Ukraine. Supposedly going to be giving them cluster bombs. Apparently those bombs are banned in around 120 countries. One would imagine that that will either, frankly, finish off what's going on in Ukraine or maybe escalate the situation desperately and beyond repair. But there we go. Lots in the inbox today and lots going on, certainly, in the world of news. We will, of course, very, very shortly be giving you any updates as we get them on the BBC scandal that appears to be rumbling on, certainly not stopping any time soon. I'm also going to be discussing a lot about a community in Wales that have taken it upon themselves to rise up in the face of an asylum seeker hotel. Some really interesting video that came out over the weekend. I'm hoping to be talking to an individual whose wife lost her job at this hotel there, just to kind of get a flavour of what this means for the families of the people involved and whether or not what's happened in Wales, which is essentially a public protest about an asylum seeker hotel popping up in their area, whether or not that is going to spill out now over the country. So I'll be talking all about all of that. But interest rates are at their highest level for many years, and the cost of living crisis is still, of course, very, very real for people. Are we heading towards a major economic crisis unless the government takes a different approach? But the key point of this, for me, is was Liz Truss actually right? And is Jeremy Hunt an absolute dud? Patrick Christys on GB News, Britain's news channel. At 4 o'clock, we will be live outside the BBC's headquarters after an unnamed presenter was accused of paying a teenager for sexually explicit pictures. As we ask, should they be named? But let's get more on the top story. The BBC presenter who was accused of indeed sending sexually explicit pictures. The BBC have met with the police this morning, who say that they are not launching an investigation, but they are looking into whether there is evidence of a criminal offence being committed. Let's get the political reaction to this big story. I'm joined now by GB News' political reporter, Catherine Forster. Catherine, thank you very much. Some people are questioning whether or not an MP may use parliamentary privilege in order to name this individual. What is the latest political reaction?
Well, right across the political spectrum, really, MPs are united in being very critical of what's going on and desiring a swift and fair investigation and outcome. Now, the Prime Minister's spokesman said that Rishi Sunak has got full confidence in the Director General, Tim Davie. People like Suella Braverman were saying that it was vital that the BBC takes prompt action. Her predecessor as Home Secretary, Priti Patel, put it a little bit stronger. She said the response had been derisory and that the BBC had become a faceless and unaccountable organisation. Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, too, saying the BBC needs to get its house in order and quickly. So this really is a huge crisis for the BBC because, of course, we've had years of scandals, thinking back of Jimmy Savile, of Rolf Harris, of the Martin Bashir, the way that they got the fake bank accounts to get that Diana interview. And of course, it's only a few months since Richard Sharp, the then chairman, had to resign because of the way he'd got the job through his contact with former Prime Minister Boris Johnson. So this is an absolute nightmare for the BBC. And sure, nobody is naming this presenter at the moment, but it's difficult to see how long that is likely to hold, and it's likely to be career-ending, I would suspect, even if it doesn't resolve in a criminal investigation. Of course, that all depends on whether this young person was 17 at the time that they first sent images to this BBC presenter.
Yes, indeed. Catherine, thank you very, very much. That's Catherine Forster there, as GB News' political reporter in Westminster for us to get the latest on the political reaction. There is indeed a huge amount of political pressure now on the BBC to either conduct a very swift, fast, thorough and, frankly, public investigation, or also to name this individual in question. There also, according to reports, appears to be a huge amount of internal pressure in the BBC as well, as a whole host of stars have been wrongly named on Twitter, and Twitter has just turned into even more of a defamation cesspit than it usually is at the moment. And we can understand why people would want their names cleared and, indeed, any speculation to be cleared up. We will be bringing you the very latest on this BBC scandal throughout the course of this show. I think it is reasonable to expect quite significant developments in the near future. But borrowing costs have been going up for all of us, including the government. So-called gilt yields, the interest rate investors demand to lend the government, have been soaring in recent weeks. Look, the state now pays more to borrow than during the aftermath of Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng's mini-budget last September. But here we are, OK? Does this now mean that Liz Truss's efforts to cut tax and boost growth weren't actually that stupid after all? Frankly, was Liz right? Here's our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan, with On the Money. Liam, there was this perception, wasn't there, that with Jeremy Hunt, the adults were in the room now and that everything would be nice and Mr Sensible and potentially, you know, Jeremy from accounts was a great thing. And actually, it's not been great, has it?
Well, after that Liz Truss, Kwasi Kwarteng mini-budget back in September, people started hearing about these things called gilts markets. Oh, my God, what are they? Well, that's where the government borrows. And, you know, our government's borrowing 10, 20 billion quid a month. So they're quite important to running the economy. And after Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng, you'll remember, Patrick, they tried to introduce tax cuts. Yeah. They tried to spend a bit less. They tried to, in Liz Truss's words, the then Prime Minister, be a bit more conservative than the Conservatives have been up until that point. And borrowing costs went through the roof. The financial markets went, no, we don't like this. And then Rishi Sunak and Jeremy from accounts came in and the gilt yields went back down again. Well, what we've got now, Patrick, we've got Jeremy Hunt and Rishi Sunak's higher taxes. We've got their more kind of sensible policies, if you like, not going for growth, high tax, high spending, and yet gilt yields, borrowing costs, are higher than they were under Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng. So a lot of people are now saying, was Liz Truss really so stupid? Did she really wreck the economy? Or were interest rates going up around the world anyway? Which, of course, they were. And there is now... This is putting some real potency in the Tory debate on tax cuts. You've got a lot of Tories coming out and saying, look, we really need to do some tax cuts if we're going to have any chance of winning this election. You've got other Tories like the peer Ed Vaizey from the sort of left of the party. He's now saying there are big chunks of my party who are, quotes, completely insane for asking for tax cuts. So this is where we are. And Liz Truss is taking up... Look, she's not going to come back and be Prime Minister, but she is a rallying point for a lot of Conservative backbenchers. And on Wednesday morning, she's launching what she's called her Growth Commission. She's got economists from around the world, mainly UK, but American economists, Japanese economists, who want to promote this kind of high-growth, low-tax agenda, and they're going to be doing reports for her and banging the drum for her vision of conservatism.
Look, is it time for radical economic change?
I wouldn't go around sacking the Governor of the Bank of England at this point. I think that would cause... And no one has been more critical of him for longer than me. Almost no one's been calling for interest rate rises earlier than me or criticising quantitative easing, all that central bank money printing. But I think if you now, did major surgery and took out the Governor of the Bank of England, there'd be a constitutional crisis because you're not really meant to.
Right.
But also I think the market would sense panic. Interest rates would go up even more. Mortgage holders, people with personal loans would suffer even more. I wouldn't do that. What I would do, Patrick, is I would start to prepare the ground for a bit less spending and a bit less tax, because the tax burden now is at a 70-year high. Tax as a share of our GDP. And I don't think in the end this high tax model is going to win the Tories any votes at the next election. If people want high tax, high spend, they can vote Labour.
Yeah.
But a lot of the country doesn't. Instinctively, a lot of the country doesn't. That's why, for years and years and years, most of the time we've had a Conservative government. People don't like paying tax.
No.
They don't mind paying their fair share. But when you've got all this fiscal drag, when, as we've often discussed, you've got, middle-ranking teachers, police officers, nurses paying the top rate of tax because of fiscal drag, people start to get, to coin a technical term, Patrick, a bit cheesed off.
A bit cheesed off, indeed. Liam, look, thank you very, very much, my good man, Liam Halligan there. Of course, our economics and business editor. I am sensing, and let me know in the inbox now, gbviews@gbnews.com. There was a prolonged period of chaos in the Conservative Party with the whole passing of Boris Johnson, if you want to call it that, and then Liz Truss's installation, and then we had that mini-budget, and everyone was going around saying, oh, this is absolutely bonkers, what's happening here? And then it seemed, didn't it, for a period of time, well, Jeremy's in now. Jeremy will steady the ship. And you really look at it and you think, have we just allowed ourselves to be carried along on this kind of river of status quo that actually has made us all poorer and has absolutely no vision whatsoever? Do we not need proper leadership and not somebody who is, frankly, just operating in that status quo? Would you Biff Hunt? That's what I want to know. gbviews@gbnews.com. But yes, the Met Police says it is undertaking further inquiries after meeting the BBC about allegations that an unnamed presenter paid a teenager for sexually explicit images. But the Met added there was no investigation currently underway. There is a lot going on at the moment with the BBC. I dare say there will probably be some updates very, very shortly, and we will, of course, bring those to you live here on this show, as well as the latest from Wales, where there's been a popular uprising against an asylum seeker hotel. Could that be coming to a town near you? Patrick Christys on GB News, Britain's news channel.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Afternoon, I'm Alex Deakin, and this is your latest weather update for GB News from the Met Office. Some wet weather around for many places tonight, and we do have warnings across Northern Ireland and Scotland. This area of low pressure is responsible, but actually it's the weather fronts moving ahead of it that have been bringing soggy conditions for quite a few through the day so far. That rain's getting heavier now across much of Scotland. Some thunderstorms across parts of Northern Ireland, and both could see some disruption from the heavy rain. And further south there's likely to be some wet weather too, brushing South Wales for a time this evening, then into the Midlands, East Anglia and southern counties of England. So, as I say, for many, a wet night, pretty mild one as well, temperatures staying in the teens, the high teens across the southeast, where it'll still be quite damp and humid on Tuesday morning. The outbreaks of rain here should peter out through the morning, And then it's basically sunshine and showers tomorrow, but again, we are likely to see some pretty heavy downpours developing, particularly across parts of Scotland, especially in the northeast, where the winds are light, which means the downpours could be very slow moving. Elsewhere, there should be some glimmers of sunshine between the showers, but still on the cool side, with temperatures mostly struggling to get into the low 20s at best. Wednesday's a similar story, though perhaps not quite as intense with the downpours. Many eastern areas should start dry with some sunshine, but then the showers get going again through the course of the afternoon. Quite breezy and again feeling on the cool side with temperatures high teens, low 20s at best. Goodbye.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
It's 4 p.m, it's Patrick Christys, it's GB News. Now, one MP has come out and accused the BBC of being a safe haven for perverts. Is this unfair? We take a look back at historic scandals at the Beeb. I'm also going to be talking a lot about this as well as a community in Wales fight back over an asylum seeker hotel. 95 people have lost their jobs at that hotel. There were protests outside it. I suspect this might become a common thing. It is, of course, tied in to the fact that we've had 1,500 channel crossers in the last 4 days. But we are going to go live now to the school in Tewkesbury, where earlier today a teacher was stabbed by a teenager for a police statement.
Academy. Minutes later, we received a call from the ambulance service telling us a male teacher had been stabbed in a corridor at the school. He was taken to hospital with a single stab wound and remains in a stable condition. It was initially thought that the suspect had fled the scene and hidden himself within the school grounds. Our officers, including specialist trained armed police, attended and carried out a thorough search. This search was both complex and meticulous in nature as we sought to ensure there were no further injured parties, as well as seeking the arrest of the suspect. The academy was locked down and 2 neighbouring schools were asked to close their doors as a precaution. Specialist resources, including the National Police Air Service and plainclothes officers, were deployed to search the wider area, and thanks to their efforts, the suspect was safely arrested by firearms officers in Stoke Orchard at 11 o'clock this morning. A knife was seized during that arrest. Searches have continued in order to ensure that there were no further casualties, and we can now confirm that no one else was injured in this attack. At this stage, the motivation behind the attack is unclear, and at this time, there is no evidence to suggest it is terrorism related. However, we are keeping an open mind while further inquiries are carried out. The suspect, a teenage boy from Tewkesbury, was arrested on suspicion of attempted murder and remains in police custody. This was clearly a very distressing incident, and our thoughts are with the victim, their family, and everyone impacted by what happened here at the school. We are working with the school and other agencies to ensure appropriate support is available, and local people will see more police in the area over the coming days as the investigation continues. Thank you.
From the police there outside that school in Tewkesbury, where at 9:10 this morning, police were called to reports of a teacher being stabbed by a teenager. Terrified parents spoke out about how they scrambled to check their children were safe. The school was locked down for a period of time. That police officer in question there, of course, was telling everybody, reassuring everybody there will be an increased police presence. An individual is in custody, and as well that they do not believe that there is anything at this stage to indicate that it is terror-related. Right, we'll have more on that as and when we get it. It's a fast-paced news agenda today, everybody. We're going to be covering everything from what's been going on at the BBC, as well, of course, to what's been happening in Wales, as the public have apparently been rising up and protesting over the imposition of an asylum seeker hotel in their area. But yes, I did just want to start with this on the BBC. Is it finally game over for the BBC? Tory MP Lee Anderson came out and said this: "It's time this taxpayer-funded safe haven for perverts was made a subscription service." Well, strong stuff, and the BBC would no doubt deny that it is indeed a safe haven for perverts. Unfortunately for the BBC, they don't actually have the best track record when it comes to cracking down on sexual predators. And it is actually reasonable, or is it actually reasonable, to suggest that the BBC has at times been some kind of safe haven for perverts. It's important, vital to say, that we do not know the exact nature of the current situation involving an as yet unnamed BBC star, and I want to make that very, very clear. I want to have a look at the historic instances in the BBC. Jimmy Savile hid in plain sight as a depraved paedophile for decades, and if you had to draw a paedophile, you would probably draw somebody who looks a lot like Jimmy Savile. And yet he went unchecked pretty much continuously for decades at the BBC. He was raping and abusing children. There is even an infamous clip of him touching a girl up on top of the pops. And the Dame Janet Smith review identified 72 victims, all connected to his work at the BBC. 8 of them had been raped. The claim is that staff at the BBC knew about complaints against Savile, but did not pass those concerns on to management because of a culture of fear that they say still persists at the corporation. That's what the report says. So we are expected to believe that the BBC had arguably this country's worst ever paedophile in its midst for decades and management weren't aware. Rolf Harris is another example. Again, we're expected to believe that there was never an inkling of any wrongdoing during his time at the B. But one lady, who was a schoolgirl at the time of an incident, told a court that Rolf Harris sexually assaulted her on the BBC show Saturday Superstore, apparently even asking her, "Do you often get molested on a Saturday morning?" Harris was 84 when a jury at Southwark Crown Court unanimously found him guilty of 12 counts of indecent assault involving victims as young as 7 or 8 years old back in July 2014. BBC presenter Stuart Hall was imprisoned in 2013 after admitting indecently assaulting 13 girls, one as young as 9, between 1967 and 1985. The evidence against him was overwhelming. There are reports from colleagues claiming that he was unable to talk to a woman without touching her. Again, this went on seemingly for years. And now there is a situation where complaints were made about a household name male presenter who it reportedly took the Beeb 50 days to suspend, and involve police. I want to make, again, a very important distinction between the incidents in the past and what we so far believe in this case. You have to ask, though, don't you, what lessons have been learnt from previous cases? Well, none, apparently. It's Savile all over again at the BBC. That is what the man who helped to expose the Savile scandal has said. After he'd been allowed to get rich off the BBC and have a weird kind of state funeral, Jimmy Savile, of course, went unpunished in his lifetime, didn't he? How many more allegations like this can the BBC realistically survive? GBviews at gbnews.com. Get them coming in. Let's just remind you of that breaking news that we got in the last hour. The Met Police is not opening an investigation into the allegations involving a BBC presenter yet. Let's cross live now to GB News' national reporter Paul Hawkins, who is outside New Broadcasting House for us. And Paul, that was the development that happened since the last time I spoke to you, which was a comment there about no investigation into allegations involving a presenter yet. So what is the latest?
Yeah, that is the latest that we have. This is from the Metropolitan Police. Very brief statement following that virtual meeting between representatives from the force and those from the BBC. We know Jeff Brown, a former Metropolitan Police detective, heads up the BBC's investigation unit. He's been there 3.5 years, so effectively the Met Police meeting with a former Met Police officer, and it is a very brief statement. There is no investigation at this time. They are assessing the information discussed at the meeting. Further inquiries are taking place to establish whether there is evidence of a criminal offence being committed, potentially that criminality being the breaking of the 1978 Protection of Children Act. We know that it's under that piece of legislation, it's an offence to take, make or share indecent images of those under 18. You cannot give consent if you're under 18, so that will be one line of inquiry for the police they're looking into, but they're very clear here. There is no investigation at this time. We also understand from our Home and Security editor, Mark White, that they're investigating malicious communications regarding speculation about other BBC presenters on social media. One of them, of course, Nicky Campbell, the presenter of BBC Radio 5 Live. He was speaking earlier today about the effect it's had on both him and his family over the weekend.
But it was a distressing weekend. I can't deny it, for me and others falsely named. Today, I'm having further conversations with the police in terms of malicious communication and with lawyers in terms of defamation.
Yeah, so for reasons of defamation and also privacy laws, that privacy ruling at the Supreme Court last year, the presenter remains unnamed. They have a reasonable right to have their privacy respected while they are the subjects of investigations. So really, the only person that can, the only way that you can find out the name of this presenter really is if they reveal themselves. And in the meantime, the BBC remaining tight-lipped, and certainly the police as well. A very brief statement from them this afternoon, but they say that there is no investigation at this time.
Yeah, indeed. Paul, look, thank you very, very much. Paul Hawkins there, our national reporter, who's outside New Broadcasting House. We will bring you any updates as soon as we get them. Now, I'm going to go to Charlie Maloney, who is a media law consultant. This is in relation to multiple different aspects of this BBC scandal. Charlie, thank you very, very much for joining me. It's great to have you on the show. Now, let's deal, firstly, anyway, with the fact that the police are at least looking at this. And that, as I understand it, centres around a discussion about the age or alleged age of an individual involved here, and if they may have been under the age of 18 as and when alleged photographs were exchanged, or however you want to phrase it. And that actually, I think, is something that a lot of people might have missed initially because, of course, the age of consent in this country is 16. But there is obviously a difference there, Charlie.
Yes, it's not commonly known that although the age of consent for sexual activity is 16, there is an age at which it's still illegal to send sexual images, and you have to be 18. And I believe that the complainant in this case is said to be 17. So if what's alleged to have happened has happened, then that could be an offence.
And that really is why it is indeed potentially so serious. Now, anybody watching or listening to this, Charlie, will be acutely aware of the kind of absolute minefield that you and I are now treading over on numerous different fronts, hence very necessary use of the word alleged at all times. Twitter has become a rampant source of defamation, and no doubt libel lawyers are queuing up as we speak to wrestle people away from their life savings. It is a point that until an individual is named, then unfortunately massive speculation, and we just heard from Nikki Campbell there, massive speculation is going to be absolutely rife, isn't it? And is it not maybe for the best to name an individual?
Well, at the moment, as you say, that person has a reasonable expectation of privacy because they're the suspect in a criminal investigation, suspected of a crime. And it's thought that naming someone as the suspect in a criminal investigation will have an impact on that person's reputation. And so that's going to have an impact on their private life. And of course, from that person's point of view, you can see why they would want that to happen. But what's happening in this case is that because there's a relatively small number of high-profile BBC presenters, people are now speculating, and they're engaging in sort of process of elimination where some stars have come out and said, it's not me. And people are simply narrowing down the number of people who haven't denied it being them. And so that's led to this unpalatable situation where people's reputations are being damaged because people wrongly think that it's them. Of course, we still don't know who it is. But the people who are wrongly being accused or thought to be the suspect are having their reputations damaged, and there is no allegation against them whatsoever.
Yeah, and that is a deeply distressing situation for all those people involved, especially given the nature of the allegations in question, which are sexual photographs of somebody who's under the age of 18. That is, amongst the worst things that you can ever be accused of doing, right? So that is clearly an awful situation for people. There is a potential way around it, which is for a member of parliament using parliamentary privilege to name this individual. And that has been done in the past, hasn't it? And I wonder whether or not that is something that the public could be aware of as a possibility.
Yes, there was a MP who named Philip Green in connection with certain allegations to do with when he was running Topshop. And there was an injunction in place. I believe it was the Telegraph at the time that he was locked in this injunction with. But of course, yes, MPs could use their parliamentary privilege to name this person in Parliament. And we've seen the Dean Dories saying that she thinks the public have a right to know who this person is because the BBC is publicly funded. But I think it's worth reminding everyone that there is still an MP who's been arrested and bailed on suspicion of rape, and they haven't been named for this exact same reason. So if we're going to get MPs naming this BBC presenter in Parliament, one might imagine they should also name this person.
The question of public interest and right to privacy are eternal questions that raise their head very, very often. And it can be an incredibly grey area. And I would suggest that this is an incredibly grey area because we end up with somebody who's potentially paid essentially directly or indirectly by the taxpayer, working at a public service broadcaster. There is a certain reputational element as well that comes with that and the nature of the job there. And then you look at the incident in terms of the way that the BBC initially approached the Sir Cliff Richard incident, which is now folklore, right, where there was the helicopter in the sky, this guy's getting his house raided, and that ended up, I'm reading a headline in front of me here, on the BBC. BBC pays £2 million in final settlement after privacy case. Can I ask you, Charlie, the Sun have been all over this, OK? So the Sun have been all over this. They've been leading the way on this from the start. If they, on their front page tomorrow, got fed up and named this individual, what do you think would happen?
Well, you're absolutely right. It is a grey area. And the first stage is, do they have a reasonable expectation of privacy? And the cases say that this presenter does. Then the second stage is, does their right to privacy get outweighed by the public interest or the right to freedom of expression? And, of course, the courts have been very clear that that is by no means set in stone, that it won't be outweighed by the public interest. And so it could very well be that this is a case where the public interest is so great that publishers should name the presenter. However, it's the uncertainty which deters people, because if you look at the previous cases, they've all ended up with the court saying that the right to privacy won. Cliff Richard case, ZXC case, there was another case about someone called Aladdin Sikri, who was arrested in connection with the Manchester Arena bombing. All the cases say that the privacy right wins. And so you can see why publishers are sitting there thinking, well, is this really worth the risk?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, Charlie, thank you very much, and spectacularly well done for guiding us through this horrendous minefield that we're having to tread at the moment. Charlie Maloney there is a media law consultant. Right, OK, loads more on this story on our website, gbnews.com, the fastest-growing national news site in the country. All the best analysis, big opinion, and the latest breaking news. Talking of breaking news, a teenage boy has been arrested after a teacher was stabbed at a secondary school. Gloucestershire police said an adult has been taken to hospital with a suspected stab wound after Tewkesbury Academy was placed on lockdown. We heard there briefly from a member of the police who just read out a statement about 17 minutes ago. We can go now to our reporter, Jack Carson, who is outside the school. Jack, thank you very much. So what I gleaned from that press statement there was that there's not a huge amount to worry about for the wider public. There's an increased police presence and it's not terror, but I'm sure there was other things that were said as well.
Yeah, of course, yeah. I think one of the main implications there is that the police very much believe this was an isolated incident. They did say that they are unaware yet as this stage of the motivations of this attack, but they're not treating it as terror-related, although they did say that they would be keeping an open mind, of course, in their inquiries now that they have arrested this, as they say, teenage suspect on suspicion of attempted murder. We heard from Assistant Chief Constable Richard Acone from the Gloucestershire Constabulary. He said that the incident took place in a corridor of the school where a male teacher was stabbed. He was then taken to hospital with a single stab wound, where thankfully we've got the update that he remains in a stable condition. Now, there were concerns from the police when they arrived here, hence why we saw such a strict lockdown of this school as well as other schools in the area where their playing fields go onto the academy behind me, but they were unaware of whether the suspect had fled, and so plainclothes officers in this area, officers throughout the school, conducted a thorough search. They said then that the suspect was arrested in Stoke Orchard, which looks like to be about a 10-minute drive away. He was arrested by firearms officers and a knife there was seized. Now, as I said, there was no evidence of terrorism so far, no evidence of a motivation either. But the good news for the parents, at least, is that this is thought to be an isolated incident.
So, Jack, thank you very, very much. Jack Carson there, who is outside Tewkesbury Academy, as you can see, where that shocking incident took place earlier on today, about 9:10. This morning, armed police were called to the scene after a teenager allegedly stabbed a teacher there. Well, look, in the next few minutes, I will have this fascinating story about protests outside a South Wales hotel. A lot of people were alerting me to this on Twitter over the weekend, and I thought I would do it, actually, because this hotel is being used to house more than 200 migrants. 95 members of staff have lost their jobs. I will be talking to somebody who is the husband of a lady who sadly lost her job there, but there were widespread community protests, and I thought, this is interesting. Is this going to start becoming the norm? And frankly, I suppose really, if the Home Office isn't listening and the government doesn't appear to be listening and there's nothing that your local MP can do or anyone else can do and hoteliers aren't listening, I mean, is this the only way to go about it if you don't want something like this in your area? But right now, it's the weather.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Afternoon, I'm Alex Deakin and this is your latest weather update for GB News from the Met Office. Some wet weather around for many places tonight, and we do have warnings across Northern Ireland and Scotland. This area of low pressure is responsible, but actually it's the weather fronts moving ahead of it that have been bringing soggy conditions for quite a few through the day so far. That rain's getting heavier now across much of Scotland. Some thunderstorms across parts of Northern Ireland, and both could see some disruption from the heavy rain. And further south there's likely to be some wet weather too, brushing South Wales for a time this evening, then into the Midlands, East Anglia and southern counties of England. So, as I say, for many, a wet night, pretty mild one as well, temperatures staying in the teens, the high teens across the southeast, where it'll still be quite damp and humid on Tuesday morning. The outbreaks of rain here should peter out through the morning. And then it's basically sunshine and showers tomorrow, but again, we are likely to see some pretty heavy downpours developing, particularly across parts of Scotland, especially in the northeast, where the winds are light, which means the downpours could be very slow moving. Elsewhere, there should be some glimmers of sunshine between the showers, but still on the cool side, with temperatures mostly struggling to get into the low 20s at best. Wednesday's a similar story, though perhaps not quite as intense with the downpours. Many eastern areas should start dry with some sunshine, but then the showers get going again through the course of the afternoon. Quite breezy and again feeling on the cool side with temperatures high teens, low 20s at best. Goodbye.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Well, last month, Rishi Sunak claimed that his plan to stop the boats was working. In the last 4 days, though, 1,500 migrants have crossed the channel. And, of course, we have seen those community protests outside a hotel in Wales where people are saying, no, we cannot have this asylum seeker hotel in our back garden. And I wonder whether or not the people of Wales are going to be leading the charge against these asylum seeker hotels, and what happens if more people, more members of the public, start to rise up. Patrick Christys on GB News, Britain's news channel. Well, a little later this hour, I will get the political reaction to the BBC presenter scandal as pressure is mounting, in some quarters anyway, to get this individual named. Very strong views either way on this, whether or not people do think, actually, GBviews at gbnews.com, that this presenter in question should actually be named. There is also a special report on the 1,500 migrants who crossed the Channel in just 4 days. Now, it is, of course, the 4th day in a row that a group of seriously unhappy protesters have gathered outside Stradey Park Hotel in South Wales after controversial plans to house up to 241 migrants there were announced. 2 arrests were made yesterday as violence broke out. And in fact, if you're watching us on TV or online, what we're going to show you now is indeed clips of some of these protests, OK? This is just one incident. The police there obviously getting involved. That has been going on for several days. And police said that they remained on the scene to ensure the demonstration remained peaceful. More people gathered again today as locals were expecting the migrants to arrive. It is fascinating, this. 95 people lost their jobs at this hotel. The hotel there did not, according to what the people have told me anyway, did not really consult them. They were told, in fact, that there may well be other jobs available for them. That hasn't materialised. And this is quite a small community. And they do not want the asylum seeker hotels in their area. 95 staff did lose their jobs. The council has lost a bid for a High Court injunction to temporarily block the plans. It's a classic case. Your local MP's against it, everyone's against it, but it's being forced on them. Joining me now is local resident Steve Williams, who is part of the local action group opposing the plans. Steve, thank you very, very much. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show, I must say. So what is going on there? I believe that we're in the 4th day of these protests. People were alerting me to these videos online over the weekend. Yeah. And I thought I've got to cover this, really. What's happening for you?
Yes, thank you, Patrick. Good afternoon to you for allowing me the time for this now. Let's put it in context here. On Friday, we had the Royal Court of Justice hearing on the Strand, and Rob Howard and Gary Street travelled down from London and ripped the gates that are at the premises there. They have escalated this situation quite dramatically, in all honesty. It's affected the community, it's affected the local policing. Officers who are, many of them themselves are local officers living within short distance of the Stradey Park Hotel, have been involved in it. They have family living close by. And the scenes as you're seeing here now on the screen are obviously people's feelings and emotions. We had a meeting several weeks ago in the Selwyn Samuel in Llanelli, where we voiced our concerns there, having been told that the council had been told a month before about the ongoing to the Stradey Park Hotel. The secrecy and the way in which the Home Office, Clear Springs, Stirling Woodrow, Griffin Leisure, whoever is actually the owner, because they won't admit to being the owner, yet they're signing a contract with the Home Office in Clear Springs, had not engaged. They've shown total contempt for the public of Llanelli. The secrecy is adding to the concerns and the tension. They're saying that it's men and women coming, yet there's no evidence to suggest that. Obviously, one thing as well, which we find funny, is that they're saying it's family groupings. Now, the rooms are going to be allocated to 3 individuals. It'd be extremely lucky for them to find groups of 3 brothers, cousins, uncles in a boat together. Now, one of the things they're saying constantly is about the vulnerability of these individuals. Now, what we have to consider, yes, there are vulnerable individuals amongst this group. Totally agree with that, and people do need to be helped and supported when they are being persecuted in their home regions. However, I think we're extremely naive to think that 100% of the people coming off those boats are vulnerable. But however, they put them in rooms with people who may not be vulnerable, may themselves be pressuring these vulnerable people and causing them harm. Now, what recourse do those vulnerable people that are going to be in these rooms have? What recourse does their local community have when they're losing jobs, they're losing investments?
Well, nothing, Steve. No, this is the thing, Steve. This is the thing, right? This is the thing. Nothing. You are completely powerless in all of this situation. But you know what the key difference between what you're doing and, frankly, the vast majority of other areas, certainly that I can think of off the top of my head, is that you are actually fighting back. Essentially, you are actually deciding that you're going to take to the streets and presumably not go away until you get it resolved to your satisfaction. So what are you hoping to achieve in this? Just to kick up so much of a fuss that they can't house these people there?
There are questions that we've asked both of the Home Office and the company about all of this. None of them have responded. They come back with, we can't tell you because of policies. We've got a number of freedom of information requests going on. You'll be aware that a few weeks ago, Damien Griffiths asked a question in the House of Commons regards Russian investment money. That hasn't been answered. Now, there's a genocide going on in Ukraine, and the Home Office may, because bear in mind, many of these hotels across the UK that are being used by the Home Office are probably very similar to the Stradley Park Hotel in their investment and business protocol. How many of those investors know that, one, this has happened to their hotel, and two, are of Russian origin, and money may be going into the coffers of Russian oligarchs, or, excuse me, I can't pronounce the name correctly, these Russian millionaires that have got sanctions or potential sanctions against them, into their coffers. Now, they're not answering that question, and realistically, when an elected representative in the House of Commons asks a question and is ignored, it shows a contempt for the democracy at the moment in the UK.
Yeah.
Now, we're not a racist group of people. The people that are there, we had a march a couple of weeks ago on a Sunday to support the workers. You may have highlighted on your channel, I'm not sure. However, we met up at the local town hall, prepared, and most of the people were over 60s. You know, they were marching up there, and one person. There was obviously people from the far left there, which were obviously giving their views, which is totally acceptable. However, when an elderly lady mentioned the fact that she felt a lot of them were economic immigrants, she was automatically called a racist straight away, and there's a quite
which is absolutely ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous.
So I just clarify this. This lady is in fact in a mixed race marriage and has been for many years. So she walked away almost in tears for being called a racist by a person, and she'd asked a question that everybody's asking.
Yeah.
The government are playing ping pong every day in the House of Commons. They laugh at each other. They are not children. They have got to look and speak to communicate to each other and say, there is a problem. Who are the best people to fix it? Let's sit down and let's work it. The boats are coming from France. Surely the size of the France coastline, I appreciate, is extremely large, but the size of the boats that are coming across, they can't be taken off from many places.
No.
Why aren't they being monitored by the French police?
Steve, thank you for coming on the show and for talking to me about this. And I would love to talk to you again very, very soon, Steve. So, I will chat to you again soon. And I know a lot of people around the country will be maybe wishing that they'd behaved in the same way that the people of your part of Wales have been behaving, because essentially a lot of people are very unhappy with the situation. Steve Williams there, I can't pronounce it, that's why I'm not doing it. Steve Williams who's part of the local action group for the plans. Flaneffley, I think. Anyway, don't at me. Right, OK, loads more still to come between now and 5 o'clock. Rishi Sunak's claim that his Stop the Boats policies aren't working appear to be in tatters. 1,500 people crossed the channel in just 4 days. Now, though, it's your headlines with Ray Addison.
Thanks, Patrick. And our top story this hour. The Met Police has met with the BBC following reports that a presenter paid a teenager for explicit photos. The force says it will now work to establish if there is any evidence of a criminal offence. The corporation announced yesterday that it had suspended the unnamed star almost 2 months after a complaint was first made. A teenage boy has been arrested on suspicion of attempted murder after a teacher was stabbed at Tewkesbury Academy in Gloucestershire. The secondary school was put into temporary lockdown as police responded. Assistant Chief Constable Richard Ocone said there were no other casualties.
We received a call from the ambulance service telling us a male teacher had been stabbed in a corridor at the school. He was taken to hospital with a single stab wound and remains in a stable condition. The suspect was safely arrested by firearms officers in Stoke Orchard at 11 o'clock this morning. A knife was seized during that arrest.
And US President Joe Biden has completed his brief tour of the UK after meetings with the Prime Minister and the King. He's now on his way to Lithuania for a 2-day NATO summit, which starts tomorrow. Mr. Biden was given a warm welcome at Windsor Castle, where he discussed climate issues with the King. That followed a meeting with Rishi Sunak at Downing Street, where, despite recent tensions over Ukraine, both leaders paid tribute to the special relationship. You can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com. Now, let's get straight back to Patrick.
Well, the Prime Minister's recent boast that his Stop the Boats policies are working appears to be in tatters today. We just heard, didn't we, there, from a wonderful chap called Steve, who's been helping to protest outside an asylum hotel in Llanelli there. Those protests are continuing. The police are... I mean, it's the most well-guarded bit of shrubbery in the country outside that particular hotel at the moment. But is this not where government policy meets reality, where you try to approach hoteliers directly, offer them, for want of a better phrase, a boatload of cash to be able to house people, some of whom may well be claiming to be children, some of whom, of course, we have no idea who they are, where they're from, what their criminal record is like, and you sack local workers at that hotel and plonk asylum seekers in there indefinitely at the expense of the taxpayer. That is what happens, isn't it, when reality meets policy. But last month, Rishi Sunak claimed that those policies were behind a 20% fall in the number of Channel migrants arriving in the UK. Now, a surge in small boat numbers in recent weeks has seen that gap disappear, though. The 13,000 who've crossed is now the same as it was at this point last year. So we are right in line with it being another record year. Our Home and Security editor, Mark White, has brought us an exclusive report of the madness that happened over the weekend.
Things are now down 20% compared to last year. This is proof that our deterrent strategy can work.
It was a bold claim. Just a month ago, the Prime Minister down in Dover insisting his Stop the Boats plan was working. But since then, a surge in small boat arrivals has exposed that claim to be at best premature. The latest arrivals at Dover Harbour come amid an improvement in weather conditions, which has seen more than 1,500 people brought here in just 4 days. In fact, the number of arrivals for the year so far has reached the 13,000 mark. That figure is the same as the 13,000 who crossed at this point last year. Maritime experts who know these waters well say the initial 20% reduction in crossings was purely down to bad weather and not government policy. Despite the clearly increasing numbers of Channel migrants, the Home Secretary has reiterated her determination to stop the boats.
Well, Prime Minister and I are absolutely clear. We've got to stop the boats. That's why we're working very hard to introduce new legislation. Last year, there were 45,000 people who arrived illegally. It's costing us £6 million a day in hotel accommodation. This has to stop.
The surge in small boat arrivals is just the latest setback to the government's plans to tackle the Channel migrant crisis. The Court of Appeal ruled the deal to send some of those arriving to Rwanda is unlawful. And in Parliament, the Lords are continuing to block the progress of the government's illegal migration bill. Weather conditions in the Channel are set to get choppy in the days ahead. But we're heading for the peak months, where flat camp conditions will pave the way for thousands more to cross. And if those figures continue to increase beyond last year's totals, Rishi Sunak will face the prospect of failing to meet one of his government's key priorities. Mark White, GB News.
Well, Mark White joins me in the studio now. And Mark, I mean, look, clearly we are on course for another record year, given what's happened in the Channel over the weekend. We've just seen there that tensions are absolutely peaking in Wales, where a community is now in open revolt over an asylum seeker hotel taking place there. I dare say that many people in other local communities are going to be looking at what's happening in Wales and potentially reacting that way in their town or village as well. It's not looking good in the Channel, is it?
Well, it's not, but you wouldn't think that from listening to the news conference that was given by Rishi Sunak just last month, when he said 20% fall in the number of those coming across the English Channel was down, actually, to a large degree, to the government's Stop the Boats policies, that was beginning to work. Now, there were more than a few eyebrows raised when he made that claim, premature probably at best. Foolhardy, others might say as well, because clearly it's come back to bite him, because we are now at a stage where the number crossing the English Channel has reached the same number crossing the English Channel at this point last year. So that's not a 20% reduction anymore.
It's a surge, actually.
That gap, has disappeared. And we've had a position in the English Channel where there have been these unusual northeasterly winds that have been predominant for several months now. And there have been breaks in the weather. Anytime there's a break in the weather, you get a surge coming across. So that just tells you all you need to know about what's happening. You know, it's weather related. And once again, over the weekend, we had more or less good conditions. 1,500 people came across in 4 days. Another couple of boats, we think, are on their way at the moment, 200 having already arrived this morning, Patrick. So not only are we now equal with where we were last year, but I think now that we get into what are often the very flat, calm months in the Channel, we'll see that number absolutely rocket.
Yeah, we will indeed. And I think that the potential, very unfortunately, for some kind of civil unrest issues in the UK is absolutely vast. So we are witnessing the ongoing issues that's happening in Wales there, where 90% of this, and it is a tale now as old as time, which is, you know, the Home Office essentially contacts a hotel company. That hotel company decides that they want to take the money and allow this to be used for asylum seekers, which is easy money and consistent money if you can get it. The staff there are made promises, those promises aren't kept. The public, the community don't want that situation happening there. It's not deemed to be a safe or feasible location at all, and yet it's forced through. But what makes the difference there is that they are rising up about it. And, you know, we are now confronted with situations of police officers, you know, dragging middle-aged local citizens away and arresting them and potentially giving them a criminal record, because they are basically saying, look, please, can we just stop this chaos?
And I think you're right. I think tensions are only going to increase. That's why there's an imperative now that we're seeing from the government in opening these bases at Wethersfield in Essex and also at RAF Scampton. Down in Portland, we're expecting this barge to come over to arrive there this week sometime, we think. That will accommodate in that barge 500 people. Well, that's 1/3 of those who've arrived in just the last 4 days. It gives you an indication of just how significant this problem continues to be.
Mark, thank you very, very much. It's Mark White there at home, and security editor, keeping you up to date on all of the latest Channel migrant madness. Well, there's good news and bad news on the travel front today. So, we've sorted out the issues that saw people have to wait months and months for a new passport. We've done really well at that. In fact, it's almost magic, actually, the way that that's happened. So that is great. But EasyJet have cancelled 1,700 flights. So you might have a passport, but you won't have a holiday, which will ruin the holiday of 180,000 people. Also, again, there's the old issue of the European air traffic controllers. But at least you've got a passport. Patrick Christys on GB News, Britain's news channel. Right, well, in a moment, I will tell you why there is good and bad news for holidaymakers. But, of course, the big story of the day is the BBC scandal. And it appears to be a fast-moving picture over there with new lines coming out quite quickly. The BBC presenter who's accused of paying a teenager for sexually explicit pictures. There is no police investigation as it currently stands, but we're told that detectives are assessing the information discussed in a virtual meeting with the BBC. Let's get the political reaction to this story, of which there has been a lot. I'm joined now by GB News' political reporter, Catherine Forster, who was in Westminster for us. Catherine, big pressure, political pressure on the BBC to A, conduct a thorough investigation, B, explain themselves, and C, name this individual. Potentially threats as well that if they don't, then an MP will, using parliamentary privilege.
Yes, huge pressure on the BBC. This story has been going for several days and seems to be just mounting and mounting all the time. Now, Rishi Sunak's spokesperson said that the Prime Minister does have full confidence in Tim Davie, the Director General. Also took a bit of a pop at social media companies and indeed all the people who've been posting on social media. You can go on there, it's absolutely rife with speculation about who this person is, but a warning to be mindful of what you're posting and the potential for defamation. And that, of course, is the reason why this individual, widely known in media circles, has yet to be named. But it does feel like that is likely to be unsustainable. And the Culture Secretary, Lucy Fraser, met with the BBC yesterday, has asked to be kept updated at all stages of this investigation. As you say, not a police investigation as yet, but that could well change as they get more information.
Indeed, Catherine, look, thank you very much. Catherine Forster, GB News' political reporter. And I think the key line there from Catherine is, I would suspect, it is unsustainable to hold this name back for much longer. So keep your eyes and ears peeled for that. Now, over 180,000 holidaymakers have had their summer flights with EasyJet cancelled. The airline says unprecedented air traffic control delays is to blame, but most of the cancelled flights are from Gatwick Airport. The airline says 95% of affected passengers have had their flights rebooked. 9,000 unfortunate people have yet to receive a replacement flight. But it's not all bad news for travellers, however, as the Times is reporting, and in fact this is genuinely, says we might have done something efficiently. They're reporting that the Passport Office is now a model of efficiency, with some applications getting a Brexit blue document within just 5 days. Joining me now is Clive Ratton, who's the Chief Executive of the Business Travel Association. Can I start with you about the passport situation, if that's OK? It does look as though people are now able to get a passport before they die of old age.
Yeah, great to speak to you, Patrick. And it is some good news for a change. It's right, we've actually got the passport system working pretty efficiently right now. As you say, it's all gone online and it's very simple and easy to do. And I've heard of people getting passports in 4 days. And in fact, I was just renewing my wife's passport last week, and we have chosen to go and pick it up. And there's plenty of appointments. And that was done really quickly in about 5 minutes online. And we go and pick the passport up in Peterborough on Saturday. So, yeah, really positive news. So you shouldn't have to worry as we did last year.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, it is great stuff. It's an absolute farce that we were in a situation where, you know, you'd lose your passport, it would get damaged or something, and you've got, you know, your family there and you're looking at going on holiday and you've got to wait months for what is, you know, whilst it's an important document, it is nonetheless just a document. Right, talk to me about what's going on there, because whilst we've all got passports now, we might not be able to go anywhere because there's a mixture of foreign air traffic controllers and EasyJet, and what's going on?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's really disappointing to see what's been happening at Gatwick over the last few days and a bit before, but it is all to do with the air traffic control and Eurocontrol with strikes and French airspace being closed for air traffic control and Ukraine. So a real kind of sad situation to get into. But the reason that EasyJet have gone ahead and cancelled these flights is to avoid this happening all the way through the summer. So I realise for those people, that 180,000 people that are finding out that their flight may have been cancelled or changed, more importantly, because I understand from EasyJet they are all being rebooked onto flights, then, you know, it is pretty bad news. But it is preventative to avoid what's been happening over the last couple of days at Gatwick in particular.
Clive, thank you very much. Short and sweet, but it's good to have at least some good news. Some good news, and then, a bit of bad stuff. But, hey, that's the way it is. Clive Bratton there, Chief Executive of the Business Travel Association. Good stuff. Right, OK, this top story of the day, of course, and I suspect it's going to be the top story for a while, is that the Met Police says that it is undertaking further inquiries after meeting the BBC about allegations that an unnamed presenter paid a teenager for sexually explicit images. It is important to note that one of the key factors in this is the alleged age of the complainant, but the Met added there was no investigation currently underway. Massive pressure on the BBC to name this individual for a variety of different reasons. Will they do it? Patrick Christys, GB News, Britain's News Channel.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Afternoon, I'm Alex Deakin, and this is your latest weather update for GB News from the Met Office. Some wet weather around for many places tonight, and we do have warnings across Northern Ireland and Scotland. This area of low pressure is responsible, but actually it's the weather fronts moving ahead of it that have been bringing soggy conditions for quite a few through the day so far. That rain's getting heavier now across much of Scotland. Some thunderstorms across parts of Northern Ireland, and both could see some disruption from the heavy rain. And further south there's likely to be some wet weather too, brushing South Wales for a time this evening, then into the Midlands, East Anglia and southern counties of England. So, as I say, for many, a wet night, pretty mild one as well, temperatures staying in the teens, the high teens across the southeast, where it'll still be quite damp and humid on Tuesday morning. The outbreaks of rain here should peter out through the morning. And then it's basically sunshine and showers tomorrow. But again, we are likely to see some pretty heavy downpours developing, particularly across parts of Scotland, especially in the northeast, where the winds are light, which means the downpours could be very slow moving. Elsewhere, there should be some glimmers of sunshine between the showers, but still on the cool side, with temperatures mostly struggling to get into the low 20s at best. Wednesday's a similar story, though perhaps not quite as intense with the downpours. Many eastern areas should start dry with some sunshine, but then the showers get going again through the course of the afternoon. Quite breezy, and again feeling on the cool side with temperatures high teens, low 20s at best. Goodbye.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
It's 5 p.m, it's Patrick Christys, it's GB News, and this is going to be an absolutely massive hour. Look, we are starting with the latest on the BBC scandal. Massive pressure to name this BBC star. There is a suspicion that we may well have an update on that shortly, but looking at the bigger picture at the BBC, can the Beeb actually survive this? I wonder whether or not people are now thinking about paying their licence fee, not paying their licence fee, whether, frankly, the reputational damage to the BBC will be too great in light, of course, of previous issues. Anyway, we're also going to be going live to Wales at the scene of the 4th day of protests over an asylum seeker hotel. We now have the devastating situation where police are arresting middle-aged women and dragging them into the back of a van because they are saying, I don't want to lose my job at this hotel or live in an area that was once peaceful but is now going to be dominated by Channel migrants. And I think that is a very, very bad look. I'm going to be rounding off, of course, as well with this, Jeremy Hunt. Yes, that's right. Is Jeremy Hunt an absolute disaster? It is starting to look as though Liz Truss may not have been as much of a dud as people thought she was, and some of the smart money, for want of a better phrase now, is on Jeremy Hunt starting to act very, very differently. I will have the man himself. He's a fan favourite, Roger Gewolb, who's a former advisor to the Treasury and the Bank of England. He's going to be joining me, and he's pumped up. Patrick Christys on GB News. Yeah, look, keep your eyes and ears peeled this hour because there may well be an update on the BBC scandal. GB Views at gbnews.com, but it's your headlines now.
Good afternoon to you. 1 minute past 5, I'm Ray Addison in the GB newsroom. And our top story this hour, police have met with the BBC following reports that a presenter paid a teenager for explicit photos. The force says it will now work to establish if there is any evidence of a criminal offence. The corporation announced yesterday it had suspended the unnamed star almost 2 months after a complaint was first made. Justice Secretary Alex Chalk has indicated there may need to be an investigation into how the allegations were handled.
These are really serious and really concerning allegations, and they need to be investigated quickly. Now, in the fullness of time, maybe there will be a consideration as to how this was dealt with. I think the important thing now, however, is that these matters are investigated, whether that's within the BBC, but also potentially by the police, if indeed that's what the police decide to do.
A teenager has been arrested on suspicion of attempted murder after a teacher was stabbed at Tewkesbury Academy in Gloucestershire. The secondary school was put into temporary lockdown, along with 2 neighbouring schools, following concerns that the suspect may have fled the scene. Assistant Chief Constable Richard Ocone confirmed that there were no other casualties.
We received a call from the ambulance service telling us a male teacher had been stabbed in a corridor at the school. He was taken to hospital with a single stab wound and remains in a stable condition. The suspect was safely arrested by firearms officers in Stoke Orchard at 11 o'clock this morning. A knife was seized during that arrest.
US President Joe Biden has completed his brief tour of the UK after meetings with the Prime Minister and the King. He's now on his way to Lithuania for a 2-day NATO summit, which starts tomorrow. Mr. Biden was given a warm welcome at Windsor Castle, where he discussed climate issues with the King. That followed a meeting with Rishi Sunak at Downing Street, where, despite recent tensions over Ukraine, both leaders paid tribute to the special relationship.
It's great to have you here, back in Downing Street. I think you've been here a few times before, I know, but your first time as president, so we're very privileged and fortunate to have you here. Thanks for coming.
Couldn't be meeting with a closer friend and a greater ally, and our relationship is rock solid.
The Home Secretary has reiterated the government's commitment to detaining illegal migrants who arrive in the UK on small boats. Suella Braverman was speaking following the arrival of almost 1,500 people since Friday. The provisional total for 2023 so far is about 4% lower than this time last year, when around 13,200 crossings had been recorded. Suella Braverman says it has to stop.
Prime Minister and I are absolutely clear. We've got to stop the boats. That's why we're working very hard to introduce new legislation. It's going through Parliament right now in terms of instilling a new system whereby if you arrive in the UK illegally, you'll be detained and thereafter swiftly removed. Last year, there were 45,000 people who arrived illegally. It's costing us £6 million a day in hotel accommodation. This has to stop.
The Russian president met the head of the Wagner mercenary group shortly after last month's failed mutiny, according to the Kremlin. Yevgeny Prigozhin, who led what's been described as the biggest challenge to Vladimir Putin's authority in more than 2 decades, was among 35 people invited to a meeting in Moscow to assess the war in Ukraine. Prigozhin was understood to have been exiled in Belarus following the attempted coup, which lasted only 24 hours. Shareholders in Thames Water have agreed to provide a further £750 million in funding in an attempt to stave off nationalisation. The utility giant has warned that a further £2.5 billion will be needed by 2030 as it struggles under £14 billion worth of debt. The latest funding deal comes amid government contingency plans to take control if the firm collapses. Thames Water is the UK's biggest supplier, serving 15 million households across the southeast. More than 100,000 holidaymakers have been affected by EasyJet's summer flight cancellations. The airline has cancelled around 1,700 flights between July and September, most from Gatwick Airport. Fridays and weekends are expected to be most at risk of disruption. EasyJet saying it's due to air traffic control restrictions rather than staff shortages, with 95% of passengers booked onto alternative flights. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens, so let's get straight back to Patrick.
Well, hold on to your hats, because there's only one place to start. The Met Police has held talks with the BBC about the allegations involving an unnamed male presenter. Police are now carrying out further inquiries to establish whether any crime has been committed. It's been reported that the presenter paid a teenager tens of thousands of pounds for sexually explicit images. It is, of course, the alleged age of that teenager that is potentially elevating this story to new heights, this situation to new heights. I am joined now by GB News' national reporter, Paul Hawkins, who is outside New Broadcasting House. Paul, I'll just straightforwardly ask, what is the latest where you are?
Yeah, the latest is that line from the Metropolitan Police, which broke just before 4 o'clock, that they say they did meet with representatives from the BBC earlier in a virtual meeting, one assumes via Zoom, and in that meeting they took further information from the BBC, and they're going to now take that information away and, in their own words, make further inquiries to determine what further action should follow. The further inquiries are taking place, to establish whether there is evidence of a criminal offence being committed. There is no investigation at this time. So the police are looking into the matter further, but no official investigation is underway. We've had no word from the BBC themselves. They're continuing their own internal investigation. They have a BBC investigations unit led by an ex-Metropolitan Police officer called Jeff Browns, who's been heading up the unit for the last 3.5 years, and the presenter continues to remain unnamed for 2 reasons. Firstly, that of defamation, and also that of the right to privacy. When any law enforcement agency is looking into an individual, that individual has the right to privacy while that law enforcement agency is looking into them. That's according to a Supreme Court ruling from last year. So essentially, Patrick, we've got lots of questions here, very few answers, and a huge void into which speculation is filling. And over the weekend there's been lots of speculation, and indeed various individuals on social media attempting to reveal the name of the presenter, leading to a lot of BBC presenters to be unfairly put in the limelight. One of them, Nikki Campbell, earlier, BBC Radio 5 Live presenter, spoke about this.
But it was a distressing weekend. I can't deny it, for me and others falsely named. Today, I'm having further conversations with the police in terms of malicious communication and with lawyers in terms of defamation.
Yeah, so as well as defamation, the Metropolitan Police have said that they are looking, they have opened an investigation into malicious communications as well. So people attempting to try and reveal the name of this BBC presenter using baseless accusations, basically, and running foul of defamation laws as well as a right to privacy. But at the moment, the BBC presenter remains nameless. We're still waiting for a line from the BBC, and the police say they are making further inquiries.
Yeah, Paul, thank you very much. There's Paul Hawkins, our national reporter, who's outside New Broadcasting House. Any updates, and there may well be some, we will obviously go straight back there and get them from Paul. What is fascinating is, of course, some of the lines that are coming out at the moment in terms of BBC TV and radio presenters being told to leave space in their schedules just in case the individual in question names himself. There is the massive, massive question about whether or not it's in the public interest to name this individual. Whether or not the BBC should, as Paul was saying there, it's actually very difficult for them to do so, given the law of it, of course. Or whether or not the individual should name themselves. And supposedly, again, the BBC is coming under mounting pressure from within, from its own stars. And I am not surprised, because the amount of mudslinging that's doing the rounds on social media and the level of people who are being accused of what, if indeed true, is clearly a pretty, well, heinous and disgusting incident, isn't it? There are also questions about what now for the BBC, given the fact that it has a relatively checkered past, and there is an important distinction, a very important distinction, between the likes of those historic and very extreme cases in terms of Jimmy Savile, etc., and what we understand may have taken place in this case. There is a world of difference between those two things. But the BBC, of course, does have a bit of a checkered past when it comes to its handling of situations like that. I'm joined now by Akhil Ahmed, who is the former head of religion and ethics at the BBC and Channel 4. Look, thank you very much. Great to have you on the show. Do you think this person should name themselves or be named?
Well, thanks for having me on. Obviously, speaking here in a completely personal capacity, no, they can't actually be named, can they? Because of the fact of the matter is that, that's just, there's an investigation going on. We don't know yet, actually, what particular crimes may have taken place, because there's so many permeations in this. We don't actually know what's going on in that sense. What we do know is that allegations have been made, and they were significant enough for the BBC to suspend the individual while those investigations have taken place, and the police have been informed of the information the BBC have now been given. So there is a process, and in that process, this individual has to be given the right to whether or not, if there's any crime being committed, because that, again, we don't know, if there's any crime being committed, then that individual, there is a process involving that. Yes. Now, if they haven't committed a crime, then there's another conversation, I agree with you, about whether or not, for the sake of the BBC and for the sake of a lot of the individuals working at the BBC, on screen, on air, off air, etc., that they are then given the opportunity to kind of like say, hey, it's not us, because Nicky Campbell is an old friend of mine, and I didn't like him going through what he went through, as did others over the weekend, because why should this social media frenzy create a situation where allegations like that often stick?
The thing is,
because
though,
people think there's no smoke without fire.
Well, this is it, right? And the thing is, as well, though, it's not just actually Twitter. It's every pub is humming with this kind of stuff at the moment. People sitting around their dinner tables, you will know. I mean, my phone was blowing up over this. Everyone is, right? Everyone saw it. And that's the kind of added thing to it as well. When it comes to the BBC as an institution, OK, some of the reports that have come out, and again, want to emphasise the world of difference, frankly, between some of those vile, extreme, historic incidents and what is alleged to have happened here. But one thing that keeps coming up in some of these inquests that they have into cases like this, like they did with Savile and like they did with Rolf Harris, is how staff knew about things but felt too afraid to tell management. And so management kind of washed its hands over it and go, look, it's not up to us, we didn't know. Is there a culture of fear at the BBC?
Is there a culture of fear in any major organisation? There's no getting around that. I think within the media industry, whether in newspapers or television or radio, there's no getting away with it. Certain individuals can be bigger than the organisation or bigger than their staff. In the sense, you can have somebody who's an on-air or on-screen presenter, and they have so much kind of credibility with the audiences that the BBC, ITV, Channel 4, whoever it is, wants to keep them happy, that can create a culture that isn't really healthy. But with something like this, I don't know. Look, no one seems to legally. You can't name the person anyway. So whether or not people know it, there's no cover up in that sense, obviously, because you can't name something if you're going to break the law. But there's often a lot of innuendo and actually, I know what it can be like sometimes if, as Nikki and a few of the other people found out this weekend, when you're kind of like falsely accused of something, it can be quite difficult. So I think everybody's in a difficult situation because there's gossip, but then when there's that gossip when it goes too far. And I think the problem that everybody's got now is that actually the process has to take place, and that process can be slow. It can be really quick. Actually, as you said, we could get a statement in the next hour or two. But once that process if that process can do its job, then we'll know what's going to go on. But social media and all these kind of like wannabe journalists who are outing people left, right, and centre, it's causing chaos with effectively from Thursday onwards. There's been a suspension, there's been an investigation, the police are involved. You think that's the right way to go about it. And I think sometimes you have to be allowed to do that. The only question is what happened between Thursday and May, and that will come out later on.
Well, this is it, right?
But the fact is, allegations have been made, somebody's been suspended, investigations are taking place. Got to be allowed to do it. It's got to be allowed to happen in the correct manner.
I would suggest that there are a couple of things that are making it more difficult for the BBC as well. There's this individual called Mark Williams-Thomas, who's an investigative reporter. He was big in the kind of Jimmy Savile expose. He's been writing a lot and tweeting a lot, basically saying, essentially, the way that the BBC have responded to this, they've learnt nothing from Savile. They've learnt nothing from Savile, which is strong stuff. Of course it is, strong stuff, and that's now everywhere. Also, the pedestal that I would argue the BBC puts itself on when it comes to things like BBC Verified and we are this objective, truth-giving service, and then a situation like this happens, which is out of the control, frankly, of everybody apart from the individual involved who has allegedly actually done this stuff. It's not the fault of BBC executives. They don't go around doing this stuff. But they put themselves on this pedestal. The potential for reputational damage as a BBC brand and BBC institution. Do you think this really could irreversibly damage it, or do you just think it's too big?
Yeah, I don't think it irreversibly damages things. I think it's not good though, is it? I mean, nobody wants this kind of thing to happen. If you're an organisation with about 20,000 staff, you're going to have people that actually do things which you're not particularly happy with. And of course, if they bring the BBC into disrepute, then of course, then sanctions can be taken against them, the ultimate sanction being sacked. So I don't think it does that kind of damage. And I think, but the problem is, actually it's how many of these situations and how you react to them and how if you get it right, don't get it right. Sometimes it's a perfect storm. No, I think it's damaging, but for any organisation, it's damaging in the short term. But I think in the long term, it won't have that kind of impact. All UK broadcasters will know this when it comes to news, etc. Not just the BBC, Channel 4, ITV, etc. All of them, yourselves included, people will go to that particular broadcaster if it's what they want to do at that particular moment in time. So I don't think it will damage them totally. It's just not a great time to be at the BBC, I imagine. And I feel sorry for Tim Davie because it's one issue after another, often not of his own making, as in this instance.
Yeah, no, indeed. Look, thank you very much. I've thoroughly enjoyed that conversation. We're interested to get an insight as well into your own experiences at the Beeb as well. So, look, thank you very much. Take care. Look after yourself. It's Akil Ahmed there, who's the former head of religion and ethics at the BBC and Channel 4. I just want to remind everybody that the latest line, as far as I can see it anyway, is that presenters, this is according to reports, presenters at the BBC, both on TV and radio, are indeed preparing for their schedules to be cleared in case this individual names himself. So there we go. More on this, of course, on our website, which is gbnews.com. It's the fastest growing national news website in the country. It's got the best analysis, big opinion, all of the latest breaking news. And I think it is reasonable to expect that there may well be some very, very shortly. But there we go. Now, a teenage boy has been arrested on suspicion of attempted murder after a teacher was stabbed at a secondary school. Gloucestershire police said an adult has been taken to hospital with a suspected stab wound after Tewkesbury Academy was placed in lockdown. Let's go to our reporter, Jack Carson, now. He's outside the school. Jack, this is an absolutely terrifying situation that took place there. The school placed on lockdown, parents frantically calling the school to make sure that their children are OK. Not long after an incident that, of course, happened at a school in Wimbledon. Sadly, a second young girl died there. But this appears to be a teenager stabbing a teacher.
Yeah, there was a lot of panic, certainly this morning, from a lot of parents who hadn't necessarily been told so much information and were, like us, very much finding out for the first time what exactly had gone on. But confirmation just over an hour ago that the Gloucestershire Constabulary have confirmed the arrest of a teenage boy on suspicion of attempted murder. Now, they couldn't confirm any evidence that they'd got so far of a motivation or whether this was related to terrorism, but we do know that the incident took place inside of a corridor inside the school. It was a male teacher that was stabbed. Multiple reports from parents that I'd spoken to that it was a maths teacher, that they told me it was a maths teacher that was stabbed. They were taken to hospital where they remain, police say, in a stable condition, which of course is very good news for the school here and of course many of his own pupils. Now, in response to that incident, when police were called to this school at around 9:10 this morning, that school and neighbouring schools went on lockdown. This academy here has a number of schools which lead onto the back of its playing field, and the police were unaware and unsure whether this suspect had fled, as they had plainclothes police officers in the area, as well as other firearms officers in the area and also going around the school. Now, the police confirmed in that press conference that the suspect was arrested in Stoke Orchard. That is about a 10-minute drive away, or about 3 miles. So the suspect managed to get quite far away from the school, if they were indeed on foot, before an arrest could be made, and a knife was seized in that arrest. But of course, for pupils and parents here, very, very scary times. I spoke to a Year 7 pupil here about his experience.
I didn't know a lot of stuff, but we have this Chromebook, so I can look at the news and what's happened. So that's how I kind of knew about the stuff. And also the teachers did say about the person getting stabbed. We were all locked in to the classroom, so none of us can leave. The only time we can leave is if one of us needed the toilet or something. I was feeling really scared, because I didn't have my phone on me because I forgot it. So I couldn't talk to my mum and dad or my brother about this the stuff.
So the school came out of that shutdown at just before 2 o'clock, and lots of, as you can imagine, parents running with their arms wide open just to hug their children. The school have confirmed that they will be open tomorrow and they will be back to school as normal with support for those pupils that might need it.
Yep. Jack, thank you very much. Jack Carson there, who is, of course, outside Tewkesbury Academy with the latest on what was a very, very disturbing incident. Thankfully, now that appears to be over. But I tell you what isn't over, that is the fight. And in some cases, it is quite a literal fight, actually, for the people of South Wales who are rising up about the idea of a hotel there being used to house more than 200 migrants, mainly because 95 members of staff lost their jobs there. Absolute classic. I'm going to be speaking to somebody whose wife lost their job there. In the last hour, of course, I did speak to somebody, didn't I, who said that an elderly lady who'd been in a mixed-race marriage for a very long period of time was accused of being a racist because she didn't want people to be sacked to make way for the asylum seekers. But before all of that, it's your weather.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Afternoon, I'm Alex Deakin and this is your latest weather update for GB News from the Met Office. Some wet weather around for many places tonight, and we do have warnings across Northern Ireland and Scotland. This area of low pressure is responsible, but actually it's the weather fronts moving ahead of it that have been bringing soggy conditions for quite a few through the day so far. That rain's getting heavier now across much of Scotland. Some thunderstorms across parts of Northern Ireland, and both could see some disruption from the heavy rain. And further south there's likely to be some wet weather too, brushing South Wales for a time this evening, then into the Midlands, East Anglia and southern counties of England. So, as I say, for many, a wet night, pretty mild one as well, temperatures staying in the teens, the high teens across the southeast, where it'll still be quite damp and humid on Tuesday morning. The outbreaks of rain here should peter out through the morning. And then it's basically sunshine and showers tomorrow, but again, we are likely to see some pretty heavy downpours developing, particularly across parts of Scotland, especially in the northeast, where the winds are light, which means the downpours could be very slow moving. Elsewhere, there should be some glimmers of sunshine between the showers, but still on the cool side, with temperatures mostly struggling to get into the low 20s at best. Wednesday's a similar story, though perhaps not quite as intense with the downpours. Many eastern areas should start dry with some sunshine, but then the showers get going again through the course of the afternoon. Quite breezy and again feeling on the cool side with temperatures high teens, low 20s at best. Goodbye.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Yes, well, very shortly, I'm going to be discussing this massive topic because protesters have clashed with police outside a South Wales hotel being used to house more than 200 migrants. It comes after 95 staff at the hotel lost their jobs. And we had the rather unsavoury image of police officers dragging what appeared to be, anyway, quite elderly local people into the back of police vans because they did not want their local hotel to be used to house asylum seekers. And crucially as well, they didn't want people to lose their jobs. Is this the start of some kind of national fight back? Patrick Christys on GB News, Britain's news channel. Yeah, well, in just a few moments' time, I will bring you the story of the hotel where 95 staff have lost their jobs, more than 200 migrants are moving in. The story right now is that we currently have police officers essentially arresting local residents and carting them into the back of a police van because they are saying, please, 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 do not make this happen in our area. And I can't help but wonder how much more this is going to happen up and down the country. Look, I just want to give you a little bit more on this mounting pressure on the BBC now over allegations that a presenter paid a teenager thousands of pounds for sexually explicit images. A lot of emails on this, gbviews@gbnews.com. Dear Patrick, we must go through the correct process, not allow social media to dictate how we deal with matters of law. Innocent until proven guilty. Fair play. Somebody else, though, comes out and says, it is a pity the BBC didn't extend the right of privacy to Cliff Richard and others. Is it finally game over for the BBC? And that shows the two sides of the coin here, the public interest element versus, of course, this right to privacy. There's no police investigation yet, but I've been asking whether or not we should now just name the individual in question. And earlier, I had a rather fruity discussion with a former BBC executive and presenter Roger Bolton, who was absolutely adamant, essentially, that we shouldn't, and that there was very little public interest for doing so. Do you not think there is public interest? If you're paying wages of an individual, it's a public broadcasting service. Do you not maybe think that there is a public interest in it? I don't know, two sides to this. Here's what Roger Bolton told me a little bit earlier on from BBC Executive.
There's a public interest in seeing that people aren't condemned with assuming that people are innocent to the point until they prove guilty. And to out somebody in this way without any evidence, to feed them to the wolves, effectively, would be wrong. You've got to have substantial evidence. And the other thing, let me tell you a story back a bit. About 30 or 35 years ago, one of the most famous faces on the BBC was a guy called Frank Boff. And he presented sports programs nationwide, of which I was editor and so on. Uncle Frank, he was called. About 5 years after I'd worked with him, whatever, he went into a brothel, dressed as a woman, and took drugs. Heaven only knows what was going on. It is impossible often to guess or to know what people are like inside and what mad things they will do. We're all a bit strange. You can't rush to judgment. You've got to have evidence, because if you do that, it means that anybody can put a rumour up on the internet and destroy somebody's career. You've got to have an evidential base, but once you've got it, you've got to show the public, if you're the BBC in particular, what the evidence is and why you acted the way you did.
Can I ask from your personal insight, former BBC executive, what do you think is happening behind the scenes at the moment? Because there will be a huge, I would imagine, amount of panic about, did we react to this correctly? You've identified there as well. One of the issues that will be lobbed at the BBC now is there was something brought to you around 50 days ago, and then it was a period of time after that you've had a suspension, etc. They will now be, I would imagine, quite scared of the incoming inquest, will they? What kind of discussions will be going on, do you think?
Well, they might be scared, they might not. I mean, I think it's pretty clear that the Director General, who's a very, by the way, activist Director General, I mean, he really is, didn't know anything till Thursday. And I think if you say, you gave him Thursday to Sunday to act, as he essentially did, that's not bad. So the question is, what happened in those previous weeks until he got involved? And then the question is, what was the evidence put forward? To whom did it go? Was it the investigator? When was it pushed forward? I agree with you. We need to know all of that. But also, what was that initial information? And why does the BBC say that on Thursday, the nature of the information changed and became much more serious? We can only speculate about that. But
yeah, interesting that. Look, for what it's worth, I'm not really sure that it's possible to hold back the tide of what's been going on at the moment. And I think that the BBC will be put in a position, or somebody will anyway, where a name will emerge, but lots between now and 6 p.m. I will have the full story from South Wales, where police have clashed with protesters outside a hotel to house more than 200 migrants. Absolutely disgraceful and disgusting scenes there of local residents being carted away because they want to preserve their own local town and culture. I'll be going there in a tick, but now it's your headlines with Ray.
Thanks, Patrick. 5:34, here's the latest and our top story this hour. Police have met with the BBC following reports that a presenter paid a teenager for explicit photos. The force says it will now work to establish if there is any evidence of a criminal offence. The corporation announced yesterday that it had suspended the unnamed star almost 2 months after a complaint was first made. A teenager has been arrested on suspicion of attempted murder after a teacher was stabbed at Tewkesbury Academy in Gloucestershire. The secondary school was put into temporary lockdown along with 2 neighbouring schools following concerns that the suspect may have fled the scene. Assistant Chief Constable Richard Osone confirmed that there were no other casualties.
We received a call from the ambulance service telling us a male teacher had been stabbed in a corridor at the school. He was taken to hospital with a single stab wound and remains in a stable condition. The suspect was safely arrested by firearms officers in Stoke Orchard at 11 o'clock this morning. A knife was seized during that arrest.
And US President Joe Biden has completed his brief tour of the UK after meetings with the Prime Minister and the King. He's now on his way to Lithuania for a 2-day NATO summit, which starts tomorrow. Mr. Biden was given a warm welcome at Windsor Castle, where he discussed climate issues with the King. That followed a meeting at Downing Street, where, despite recent tensions over Ukraine, both leaders paid tribute to the special relationship. You can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com. Back to Patrick in just a moment.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
First, we'll give you a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2833 and 1.1682 euros. The price of gold, £1,498.94 per ounce. And the FTSE 100's closed at 7,273 points. Now back to Patrick.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News, investments that matter.
It's the 4th day in a row now that a group of seriously unhappy protesters have gathered outside Stradey Park Hotel in South Wales after controversial plans to house up to 240 migrants there were announced. 2 arrests were made yesterday as violence broke out. I just think, just drink this in, OK? This is absolutely disgraceful, OK? We have the police officers tasked with defending this nation and our people, arresting people. I don't blame the police officers for this, by the way. It's the situation. Arresting people, middle-aged, 2 elderly people, no disrespect to the lady in question there, of course, dragging them away, nicking them, because they don't want other people to lose their jobs at that hotel. They don't want their community to change forever. They don't want their town to change forever, and they'd like to be safe on their own streets. But alas, the priority appears to be housing people, potentially in some cases pretending to be children, potentially in some cases with criminal records in other countries, not knowing where they're from or what's going on, housing them, plonking them in the middle of a South Wales hotel. More protests are scheduled. 95 staff lost their jobs, and the council lost their bid for a High Court injunction to temporarily block the plans. This is an important story, and lots of you were tweeting me over the weekend, actually, showing me these videos, and I thought I've got to cover this, because up and down the country, this exact thing is happening. By my calculations, around 20,000 people have lost their jobs so far as a result of these asylum seeker hotels, OK? So that's an astonishing amount of people, and what I have been amazed at, frankly, is the lack of public uprising. I think it speaks volumes about the British society and British attitude, doesn't it? But now I think the tide is turning. Joining me now over the phone is local small business owner Billy Price, and Billy's wife Vicky was made redundant from Stradey Park Hotel and Spa. I believe that Billy joins me now. Billy?
Hello, Patrick.
Yeah. Hello, mate. Yes, great stuff. Now, you are just joining me over the phone, so I'm sure our viewers will appreciate that. But it's had a big impact, this, on your family, hasn't it? Could you talk me through that, please?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'd like to say, all of this has happened now. I don't blame the asylum seekers. I don't blame the hotel owners. I blame the politicians of this country and the government is in charge. That's what I want to say, first of all. How it's affected my family is when the first news broke, I think Wales Online broke the news a couple of months back. Ever since then, it's been a massive worry in our household about what was going to happen, and the way the hotel owners conducted themselves until the very last second. It didn't breathe a word. I think they must have wanted to get the deal over the line with the government, and they just kept people dangling by a string. Through rumours through the media. It's been very stressful. It's been a massive worry. It's just affected, everything, financially. Up until that point, we didn't know what was happening, and it's nice to have consistency, in life. But, thank God my wife managed to get another job fairly quickly. But, I wouldn't want anyone to go through this.
No, exactly. You wouldn't want anyone to go through this. And I think it's a testament to you, and I dare say as well, the general attitude and character of the majority of the British public, that your first opening line there was, I don't blame the asylum seekers. You blame the situation. And for anyone who is seriously thinking that, we are in some way a kind of unwelcoming and racist country, there is a difference between being unwelcoming and racist and not wanting your wife to lose their job, not wanting 94 other people to lose their job, and, having concerns probably about safety issues, etc., in your local area and your local town. Well, what do you make of the protests that have been taking place outside this hotel and I believe are still taking place?
Well, it's been a real... I'm not sure what the word positive is, but the community has really come together. It's brought people together, into one united cause, which you don't see a lot of these days. But yeah, it's brought lots of people together. We've got other local businesses offering support and possible employment opportunities to the people who've lost their jobs. So, I don't even get that normally.
No, and I suppose out of adversity and out of something like this, it is great that you guys have come together. I think that a lot of places is, again, testimony to your local town, right? Because you have seriously come together, and I think there's been kind of, workers' rights issues and things as well, and discussions that have been had there, and you have kind of presented a united front against this, whereas in a lot of places... they've not, or maybe they've been a bit too scared to. What do you think is different about where you are? I mean, dare I say it, is this potentially, I don't know, the fighting spirit of the Welsh, is it, more so than maybe you would get around the Islington area? What do you think?
I'm not sure about that, Patrick. I just think that people like yourself and GBNews have, just really highlighting the issue. We wouldn't see it on mainstream media. I think there's probably been things like this going on all around the country because so many people have been affected by it. I just think that GBNews is doing a really good job at the moment of highlighting this.
Oh, well, look, thank you very much for that. That's great. But I think it is the reason why I certainly do it is because I think it's such an important issue, and there's a burning sense of injustice for me, for people like yourself and like your wife and like your community. I think it's a horrific injustice what goes on actually up and down the country, and I take my hat off to you and everyone in that local area there. I mean, do you know how some of the 94 other people are doing who lost their jobs there? I know that your wife it was very stressful, but I believe has now found another job. Are people doing all right, are they?
Well, Vicky has worked in the spa in the hotel, and I just want to give her a big shout out to her manager. She, towards the end, I think the manager was offering a lot of support, and I don't know go into the ins and outs of it all, but I think the girls in the spa have managed to relocate to other jobs, thank God. So I'm not sure with the rest of the hotel.
Okay. Well, look, Billy, thank you. I really do appreciate you coming on and taking the time out of your day to have a chat with me here. And good luck to you, your wife, your family, everyone in the area. And thank you for speaking up about it all, really. That was Billy Price, so he's a local small business owner. Of course, his wife, Vicky, sadly was made redundant from that hotel and spa, has now thankfully found a job. Look, fascinating, this. I wanted to highlight that because that is such a microcosm of what exactly is going on everywhere now. Local people don't want it. The staff at the hotel are being made redundant. The local MP doesn't want it. And yet it's just get ploughed straight through anyway. And I just wonder whether or not other hotel owners or B&B owners or whatever will be looking at this and thinking, Do I want this kind of backlash? Do I want that to be my reputation? The money might be good from the Home Office, etc., but do I want that reputational damage from the local community? And maybe they will think twice going forward. Or maybe money talks. Anyway, talking of money, interest rates are at their highest level for many years. The cost of living crisis is still very real. But, was Liz Truss right? And is Jeremy Hunt an absolute disaster for our economy? I'm going to be speaking to one man, frankly, who is not going to be holding back. It's fan favourite Roger Gewald, former advisor to the Treasury and the Bank of England. He will be giving you his plans to get us out of this. Patrick Christys on GB News, Britain's news channel.
The 12th, a day to celebrate history, community and family here in Northern Ireland. Join me, Arlene Foster.
And me, Dougie Beattie, as we bring you live coverage of the July 12th celebrations from the beautiful city of Belfast.
And right across the United Kingdom. It's all happening here on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Well, we all know the state that the economy is in, and frankly, the blame game is starting. Was it indeed down to Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng, their mini-budget last September, or actually is it strongly looking like that might have been a good thing to have done and that Jeremy Hunt is a complete and utter stiff dud? Joining me now is finance expert and former advisor to the Bank of England and the Treasury. He is also very much a fan favourite here on GB News. It's Roger Gewald. Roger, thank you very much. We are pressed for time because we've had a lot of fast-paced news, so I'll throw it straight over to you on this. Is Jeremy Hunt an absolute disaster?
No, I think that his problem, frankly, is that he has never worked for 24 hours in any financial business in his entire career.
Yes, I mean, that is a massive problem, and it would raise serious questions about why on earth he was given the job as our Chancellor, I suppose. What do you think that we should be doing differently now? And frankly, was Liz Truss right?
I think she was right in her orientation of directions to take. I think she was quite wrong in her execution and her preparation, as was Kwasi Kwarteng. But I don't think any of that really counts. I think, Patrick, that I despair now. It's the emperor's new clothes. I watch the Prime Minister and the Chancellor and the Governor of the Bank of England and others talking about how we're fighting inflation. I mean, rather than use the football example again, let me talk about a general conducting a battle. Would you let a general go into battle for the 14th time now if he'd lost the previous 13 battles? I don't think so. Would you give a commander a ship after last 13? This is just unbelievable. We're not combating inflation. It's going up, not down. We're not protecting the dollar. It's way below where it should be. And that is because we don't have inflation driven by consumer spending. They're making it all up. They don't know what to say. I'm sure they mean well, but I feel for them because they're trapped in a rut now. They can't get out of this. They've committed themselves. Finally, they should have raised interest rates years ago, gradually, to bring them up from the low rates, not slam it 13 times on us within the last 12 months. They are killing the country. Liam Halligan has written an excellent article that you mentioned earlier in the Telegraph. And he says he's been saying this since April. Well, I've been saying this for several years. You cannot raise interest rates anymore, but it is clearly what the markets and everyone else are convinced they're going to do, and they are destroying this beautiful country.
Very quickly, Roger, matter of seconds, I'm afraid. Look, do the public have a right to feel as though they might be being run by idiots?
They have every single right. I mean, they should start a peasants' revolt like the French Revolution or something, because I don't know how else you get the message through to these people. Rishi was a stingy chancellor, and he's a high-tax guy, and Hunt obviously does what he's told, because he's never worked on a finance transaction in his life, from what I understand.
Roger, look, thank you very much.
How can he be running the country's finances?
Yeah, no, look, exactly that. Look, Roger, I'm sorry it's so short and sweet, my good man. I hope you understand, but we'll chat again soon. Roger Gewald, the former advisor to the UK Treasury and quite possibly everybody's favourite non-chancellor. But there we go. Michelle Dewberry is here. You're right.
Hello. Yes, I am very well, thank you. Well, I say I'm very well. I was very saddened by what's gone on in that school today with the teacher being stabbed. So I'm pondering tonight whether or not we should have metal detectors at the entrance of every single school in this country. Some people would say that that is overkill, but I'm starting to wonder if it's just basic common sense now.
Yeah. Well, exactly.
I feel like kids are getting more and more violent.
Well, the American approach is to have a conversation about arming the teachers, which, of course, I think is bonkers.
Oh, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't support that. But metal detectors on every single school, I think it's common sense, basically. I also want to talk about the fact that our Father who art in heaven. Yes, apparently we're not allowed to potentially say that going forward. Is it time to gender neutralise words even further than what they are now? I don't know if this is progress or world going mad. I don't know.
It's a tough one, isn't it? Because, I mean, if that is Holy Scripture and you are a believer, it would imply that you are supposed to believe that that is indeed the word of the Lord.
Yeah, but you see, I wonder, because less people are going to churches these days, and I just don't know if they're kind of scrabbling around, like almost like rearranging deck chairs on a Titanic, going, right, yeah, it's because women have been abused by men. They don't want to say our Father. That's why they're not coming to church. I just think it's a little bit straw clutching. But maybe I'm a dinosaur. Maybe language does need to evolve like this.
No, I think you're right.
Do you?
Yeah, 100%
Thank you. I might
spot
record
on.
you saying that because I've had a lot of people telling me over these last few days that I'm wrong at everything, quite frankly. So, yeah, if someone's saying I'm right, I'll record that, crop it up. That can be my new ringtone. Patrick Christys saying that I'm right.
So you're right.
I've got Peter Hitchens and Alex Dean coming on as well. So looking
Hitchens
forward
is in the
to
building.
that. He is, yes.
Good lad.
Oh, look at how happy he is. Look.
I am. I once witnessed a
why?
scrap between Peter Hitchens and a cyclist that will go down in GB News folklore.
Your eyes do not light up when you see me that way.
Tubes and Co. up next. I'll see you tomorrow, people.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Afternoon, I'm Alex Deakin and this is your latest weather update for GB News from the Met Office. Some wet weather around for many places tonight, and we do have warnings across Northern Ireland and Scotland. This area of low pressure is responsible, but actually it's the weather fronts moving ahead of it that have been bringing soggy conditions for quite a few through the day so far. That rain's getting heavier now across much of Scotland. Some thunderstorms across parts of Northern Ireland, and both could see some disruption from the heavy rain. And further south there's likely to be some wet weather too, brushing South Wales for a time this evening, then into the Midlands, East Anglia and southern counties of England. So, as I say, for many, a wet night, pretty mild one as well, temperatures staying in the teens, the high teens across the southeast, where it'll still be quite damp and humid on Tuesday morning. The outbreaks of rain here should peter out through the morning. And then it's basically sunshine and showers tomorrow, but again, we are likely to see some pretty heavy downpours developing, particularly across parts of Scotland, especially in the northeast, where the winds are light, which means the downpours could be very slow moving. Elsewhere, there should be some glimmers of sunshine between the showers, but still on the cool side, with temperatures mostly struggling to get into the low 20s at best. Wednesday's a similar story, though perhaps not quite as intense with the downpours. Many eastern areas should start dry with some sunshine, but then the showers get going again through the course of the afternoon. Quite breezy and again feeling on the cool side with temperatures high teens, low 20s at best. Goodbye.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.